The most dangerous man in Seoul is standing at the altar, and he is not afraid of anything. Not the 200 guests watching his every move, not the crime lords seated in the back row with guns beneath their suits, not the politicians who owe him favors or the businessmen who owe him blood. Kang Tae-jun has never flinched at anything in his life. But when the ballroom doors open quietly at the back of the room, and a woman in a navy coat walks in beside three small boys with his exact eyes, every certainty he has ever built begins to crack from the inside out. Watch this story until the very end. Hit that like button. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The wedding had cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. That was intentional. Every detail inside the Grand Hyun ballroom had been selected to communicate a single message: that Kang Tae-jun had arrived, completely and permanently, at the top of a world most people didn't even know existed. The floral arrangements alone, white peonies flown in from Jeju, black orchids sourced from a private grower in Chiang Mai, had required 3 weeks of negotiation and a payment that would have covered a modest family home in Mapo district. The chandeliers overhead were original Austrian crystal, each one dismantled, shipped, and reassembled specifically for this evening. The champagne being passed among the guests on silver trays was a vintage that most five-star restaurants in Seoul didn't carry, because most five-star restaurants in Seoul couldn't afford it. 217 guests filled the room. Not one of them had been invited casually. Every seat in that ballroom represented a relationship, an alliance, a debt, or a warning. The governor of South Chungcheong province sat in the third row, his expression carefully neutral, his hands folded in his lap with the practiced calm of a man who had learned early in his career that showing emotion in rooms like this one was a liability. 2 seats down from him, separated by a woman dripping in emerald jewelry, sat a man whose name appeared on no official registry anywhere in the Republic of Korea, but who controlled the movement of more than 40% of the port freight passing through Incheon. Behind them, filling the left side of the room in quiet clusters, were people whose business cards said things like private equity consultant, an international trade liaison and senior director of regional development, but whose actual work happened in places that didn't appear on any organizational chart. Kang Tae-jun knew every one of them. He knew their names, their wives' names, their children's schools, their private vices, and the specific dollar figures attached to every secret they carried. That knowledge was not accidental. It had been assembled over 11 years with the same cold precision that a surgeon brings to a dissection, carefully, completely, without sentiment. He stood at the altar now, in a suit that had been made by a tailor in Milan who worked exclusively for 3 clients in Asia, and he looked exactly the way he always looked in public: composed, remote, and faintly dangerous in a way that was difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore. He was 38 years old. His face was the kind of face that photographers loved: strong jaw, deep-set eyes, a quality of absolute stillness that read as authority on camera and as something colder in person. The slight scar that ran along his left jawline, the result of a disagreement in his early 20s that he had resolved with finality, was barely visible beneath the carefully applied foundation his stylist had insisted on this morning. He had allowed the foundation. He had not allowed her to cover the scar completely. Some things were worth keeping visible. At the front of the ballroom, beside the altar where pale roses climbed a white lattice frame, the officiant, a former appellate court judge who owed Tae-jun a favor so large it had no polite name, stood with his hands clasped and his eyes forward, radiating the precise amount of solemnity the occasion required. To Tae-jun's right, at the edge of his peripheral vision, stood Vice Chairman Park Do-shik. Park was 44, broad-shouldered, with the permanently alert expression of a man who had spent 2 decades watching other people's blind spots for personal profit. He wore his suit well. He smiled at the right moments. He had stood beside Tae-jun in rooms far less elegant than this one, and had never once flinched, and Tae-jun had taken that steadiness for loyalty the way a man sometimes mistakes proximity for trust. Park leaned slightly toward him now. "She's 10 minutes late," he said, voice low enough that only Tae-jun could hear it beneath the string quartet playing something slow and expensive near the east wall. Tae-jun did not respond. He was not concerned about 10 minutes. Han So-yeon had never been precisely on time for anything in her life, and in the early days of their relationship, he had found that quality charming. a sign of someone so genuinely present in every moment that the clock held no authority over her. Later, he had come to understand that it was simply a form of control, a way of making every room wait for her arrival, and he had come to respect that too, in its own way. The string quartet shifted into something warmer. The guests straightened, and So-yeon appeared at the far end of the red carpet runner that stretched the full length of the ballroom. She was, without question, the most beautiful woman in the room. That was not sentiment. It was simply accurate. Han So-yeon at 34 was the kind of beautiful that felt deliberate, assembled, weaponized. Her gown was ivory silk and French lace, fitted to the kind of precision that required months of alterations, and her dark hair had been swept into an elaborate arrangement that showed off the line of her neck and the diamond earrings that Tae-jun had given her on her last birthday. She walked slowly, without a bouquet. She had decided against flowers because she said flowers were for funerals and she wanted nothing dead at her wedding. With her chin slightly elevated and her eyes fixed on him, the room sighed collectively. Tae-jun watched her come toward him and felt something that was not quite love but was adjacent to it, a kind of possessive satisfaction, the same feeling he got when a deal finally closed after months of negotiation. She was extraordinary. He knew that. He had chosen her with the same deliberateness with which he chose everything, and she had chosen him back with an ambition that matched his own. And he had told himself for 2 years that this was what a real partnership looked like. So-yeon reached the altar. She took his hand. Her fingers were cold, which surprised him, though he didn't show it. The officiant cleared his throat and began. The words moved through the room in the formal cadence of ceremony, dignified, rhythmic, a little hollow, the way official language always is when it's trying to contain something as unruly as 2 human lives. Tae-jun kept his eyes on So-yeon's face, and she kept hers on his, and for a moment, in that particular stillness, the 217 people in the room, and the crystal chandeliers and the white peonies and the guns beneath the jackets, all disappeared. And it was just the 2 of them standing at the edge of something that couldn't be undone. That was when the doors opened. Not dramatically, not with a crash or a bang or any of the theatrical violence that the moment deserved in retrospect. They simply opened. Both of the tall gilded doors at the back of the ballroom, swinging inward with a quiet inevitability, as if they had been waiting all evening for exactly this. The string quartet stopped. Not because anyone signaled them. They simply stopped, the way sound sometimes stops when something more important enters a room. 217 heads turned. Kang Tae-jun did not turn immediately. He felt the shift in the room's attention the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. A drop, a tightening, something in the atmosphere that your nervous system registers before your conscious mind catches up. He watched it move across So-yeon's face first, saw the slight widening of her eyes, saw the way her fingers, which had been resting in his, went absolutely rigid. Then he turned. The woman standing in the doorway was not what anyone in that room would have expected. She was tall, with the kind of posture that comes not from training, but from a deep and unshakable internal alignment. Shoulders back, chin level, feet planted, weight evenly distributed, as if the floor beneath her was exactly as solid as it needed to be, and she had never once doubted it. She wore a navy wool coat, simple and well-fitted, over dark trousers and low heels, and against the backdrop of 217 people draped in silk and diamonds and Italian tailoring, she looked so completely out of place that the contrast alone commanded every eye in the room. She was black, Nigerian-American, though no one in that ballroom knew that yet, with close-cropped natural hair and features that were striking in their composure. Her face showed nothing. No nervousness, no apology, no anger. She simply stood in the doorway with the particular stillness of someone who has rehearsed this moment in their mind so many times that the actual doing of it has become almost mechanical. Beside her, their small hands in hers, stood 3 boys. They were identical, or nearly so. Same height, same build, same deep brown skin, same dark eyes, that were currently sweeping the room with the frank and uncomplicated curiosity of children who have not yet learned to perform emotion for audiences. They wore matching navy sweaters over white-collared shirts, dark trousers, and small leather shoes that someone had clearly polished that morning. They looked, to the assembled guests of the most powerful man in Seoul, like the most ordinary thing in the world, except for their eyes. Tae-jun saw it from 40 feet away, and the recognition hit him somewhere below his ribs, somewhere physical and involuntary. The way certain things hit you, not as a thought, but as a fact your body understands before your mind is ready to. Those were his eyes. Identical. Not similar. Not reminiscent. Identical. The exact same deep-set, slightly downward-angled shape. The same quality of darkness in the iris. The same faint intensity that people who met Kang Tae-jun always commented on and never quite forgot. 3 pairs of his own eyes looking at him from across a ballroom full of people who were all, in this moment, completely silent. The oldest boy, or the one who stepped forward first, which perhaps amounted to the same thing, separated himself from his brothers and from the woman's hand and walked forward down the red carpet runner. He walked the way children walk when they are trying very hard to be brave. Back straight, steps deliberate, chin up. And every person in that room watched him make the full length of that walk in absolute silence. He stopped at the foot of the altar. He looked up at Tae-jun, and he said in a voice that was small and clear and entirely steady, one single word. "Dad." The word landed in the silence like a stone in still water, immediate, irreversible, sending rings outward in every direction that would not stop expanding for a very long time. Han So-yeon's hand dropped from Tae-jun's. Somewhere in the back rows, someone breathed out audibly. The officiant took a small, unconscious step backward. Park Do-shik, standing to Tae-jun's right, went very still in the specific way that men go still when they are rapidly recalculating something. Kang Tae-jun looked down at the boy standing at his feet, and for the first time in 11 years of building an empire on the foundation of his own absolute unshakability, he felt the ground move, not metaphorically. Actually move, a physical sensation of instability, as if the floor of the Grand Hyeon ballroom had shifted 3 centimeters to the left and then shifted back, and the world was slightly different now than it had been 8 seconds ago, and there was nothing he could do about that. He knew who the woman was. He had known the moment she appeared in the doorway, even before his mind had consciously processed it. The body knows certain things before the brain catches up, and his body had known Amara Okoye from 40 feet away in a crowded room before he had finished turning around. He just had not known about the boys. 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days earlier, Kang Tae-jun had sat across a glass table from a woman he was in the process of discarding and had watched her sign a document that officially dissolved their marriage. He remembered that day with the clarity that attaches itself to moments you don't realize are important until much later. He remembered the quality of the afternoon light coming through the office windows. Gray, flat, the particular lightless light of a Seoul November. He remembered the scratch of the pen. He remembered that Amara had not cried, had not argued, had not looked at him with the wounded, accusatory expression he had half expected and had prepared himself to withstand. She had simply signed, set the pen down, stood up, and said, in the same quiet, unhurried voice she used for everything, "I hope you get what you're looking for, Tae-jun." Then she had walked out. He had watched her go and had felt, beneath the relief that the difficult conversation was over, a faint unease that he had buried immediately under the weight of everything else that needed his attention. The Kong Syndicate was in the middle of a critical expansion into 3 new provinces. Park Do-shik was managing a complicated negotiation with the Busan faction that required Tae-jun's direct involvement. So-yeon was waiting for him at the restaurant where he had made a reservation specifically to mark the occasion of his freedom. He had told himself the unease was guilt. He had told himself that guilt was rational and temporary and would pass. He had told himself a great many things that year. Now, looking down at a boy who had his eyes and his bone structure, and who was looking up at him with an expression that contained somehow both an apology and a demand, Tae-jun understood that the unease he had buried 3 years ago had not gone anywhere at all. It had simply been waiting for a moment exactly like this one to surface. "Who are you?" he said. It was a stupid question. He knew it was stupid the moment it left his mouth. The boy in front of him was perhaps 3 years old. No, he looked closer to 3.5, nearly 4, and the math was immediate and brutal and required no calculation. But the words came out anyway, not because he didn't know the answer, but because his mind was still trying to find a version of the answer that was different from the obvious one. The boy didn't answer. He just kept looking up at him. Then he reached out and put his small hand flat against Taejun's knee. Not grabbing, not clinging, just placing his palm there with a deliberateness that was almost adult. And Taejun felt the warmth of it through the expensive fabric of his trousers, and something in his chest contracted so sharply that he had to consciously regulate his breath. "His name is Malik," said a voice. Taejun looked up. Amara was walking down the red carpet now, slowly and without urgency, the other two boys moving beside her, one gripping her left hand, the other walking half a step behind her right shoulder. The 217 guests parted without being asked, a physical reflex, as if the room itself was making space for whatever this was. She stopped 6 feet from the altar. This close, he could see things he couldn't see from the doorway. The slight tension in her jaw, the controlled quality of her breathing, the way her eyes, when they met his, were utterly without warmth but also without hatred, which was somehow worse than either. "The one holding your knee is Malik," she said. "He's 3. They all are. The one beside me is Micah. The one behind me is Makai." She said this the way she said everything, evenly, precisely, with no inflection that invited argument. "Amara." His voice came out lower than he intended. "Don't," she said. Not loudly, not with any particular edge, just the word, dropped quietly, like a door closing. The officiant behind him made a small sound that might have been the beginning of a question. So Yeon, standing beside Taejun at the altar, had gone the color of her ivory dress, a whiteness that had nothing to do with makeup and everything to do with a body under extreme physiological stress. "What is this?" So Yeon said. Her voice was different from usual. The polished, deliberate quality was gone, stripped away, leaving something rawer underneath. She was looking at Amara with an expression that Taejun recognized, though he had never seen it on her face before, because it was the expression of someone who has just had their most carefully constructed reality dismantled in public. Amara looked at her. "This is not about you," she said, simply, without cruelty. And somehow that was worse than if she had been cruel. Soyeon's mouth opened and then closed. Park Do-shik had moved. Taejun registered this in his peripheral vision, a subtle repositioning, Park easing 2 steps to the left, which put him slightly behind Taejun's sightline and slightly closer to the mobile phone in his jacket pocket. Filing information, calculating, always calculating. Taejun looked back at Amara. "We need to talk," he said. "We do," she agreed. "But not here." "Then why—" He stopped. Recalibrated. Started again, lower. "Why here, Amara? Why like this?" For the first time, something moved in her expression. Not anger, not satisfaction. Something quieter and more complicated. The expression of a woman who has asked herself this exact question and arrived at an answer that cost her something to accept. "Because," she said, "every other door was closed." He had made sure of that, though she didn't say it. After the divorce, he had not thought much about Amara's practical circumstances. He had assumed, with the carelessness of a man accustomed to having problems disappear, that she would return to the United States, to her family in Houston, to the network of international legal contacts she'd spent a decade building, to the life she'd had before the marriage that his mother had arranged and that he had accepted with the same pragmatic calculation he applied to most things. He had not attempted to track her. But he had also, without consciously deciding to, made certain that if she ever tried to contact him through official channels, through the Kang Group's legal office, through his personal staff, through the various intermediaries who managed his public-facing life, those channels would be exceptionally difficult to navigate. Not blocked. Never anything that could be characterized as deliberate obstruction. Just slow, complicated. Full of people who were very polite and very busy, and who would certainly pass the message along when they had a moment. He had not done this out of malice. He had done it the way he did most things, efficiently, without sentiment, focused entirely on the outcome he wanted, which was an uncomplicated transition into his new life with minimal interference from the old one. He had not known she was pregnant. He was telling himself that now, in the ruined ballroom, with 217 people watching him and 3 boys with his eyes standing at his feet, and the telling of it to himself felt both true and entirely insufficient, which was perhaps the most honest thing he had felt in years. The guests did not leave immediately. That was the thing about rooms full of powerful people. They did not scatter at the first sign of disruption. They recalibrated, they watched, they stored information the way certain animals store food, methodically, for future use. The crime lords in the back rows were the most composed because they had seen disruptions of various kinds and had learned to assess threat levels before committing to a response. The politicians were fractionally less composed because their threat response was calibrated for a different kind of danger. The businessmen were the most uncomfortable because this was not, technically, their domain. Park Du-Sheik stepped forward. Perhaps the guests could be asked to— "No one moves," Tae-Jun said. His voice had shifted. The flat, quiet quality of absolute authority, the voice that 217 people in that room had heard about, and perhaps 12 of them had directly experienced, came back into it, and the effect was immediate. Park stopped. The low murmuring that had begun in the middle rows ceased. Tae-Jun looked at Amara. "You said we need to talk," he said. "I'm listening." "Not in front of them." "Then pick a room." Something crossed her face, a flicker of something that might have been surprise, or might have been the recognition that she had prepared for resistance and was being given something other than that. She looked at the boy, Malik, who was still standing with his palm flat against Tae-Jun's knee, looking up at him with those eyes. She said something to him quietly in English. "Come back to me, baby." And the boy straightened and walked back to her and took her hand without complaint, though he kept his eyes on Tae-Jun for 3 full steps after turning. "There's a hospitality suite on the 14th floor, Park said. He was composing himself rapidly, which Tae-Jun noted. "I can have it cleared." "Fine," Tae-Jun said. He turned to So-yeon. She was standing very still. The ivory dress, the diamond earrings, the elaborate hair, all of it intact, all of it immaculate, and underneath it a woman who was working very hard to keep her face from showing what her face wanted to show. "So-yeon," he said. "Don't," she said. It was the same word Amar had used 10 minutes earlier, and the coincidence of it landed strangely. "I'll explain." "Don't," she said again. Her voice was controlled now, the polish back in place, the rawness tucked away, which was impressive, he thought, under the circumstances. "Go talk to her. Do whatever you need to do. I'll be in our suite." The way she said our suite made it clear that she was claiming something, even now, that the word our was doing real work. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at Amara, and he walked toward his former wife and his 3 sons in a ruined ballroom while 217 people watched every step he took. The hospitality suite on the 14th floor was large and impersonal in the way that expensive hotel rooms are impersonal. Every comfort provided, no character whatsoever. There was a seating area with a low table, a bar cart that no one would touch, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the lit grid of the Gangnam district at 9 in the evening, and the kind of hush that comes from soundproofed walls and high floors, and the distance between yourself and the noise below. Tae-Jun stood near the windows. Amara sat on the couch across the low table, her coat still on, her posture unchanged. The 3 boys had arranged themselves around her. Malik, on her left, pressed close against her side. Micah on her right, slightly more separate. Makai directly in front of her on the low table, which he had immediately claimed as a seat the moment they entered the room, and which she had permitted without comment. They were watching Tae-Jun with the frank, systematic attention of children who have learned to assess new situations before committing to them. He was being evaluated by 3-year-olds. The absurdity of this, in the context of the last 20 minutes, might have been funny in a different version of his life. "How long have you been in Seoul?" he asked. 2 days? Where are you staying? That's not relevant to why I'm here? He looked at her. I'm trying to understand the situation. The situation, she said, is straightforward. I'm here because the boys' cardiologist in Tongyang identified an abnormality during their last examination. A structural irregularity. She believes it may be hereditary. She needs your complete cardiac history, yours and your family's, to determine what we're dealing with and what the treatment path looks like. Tae-Jun was quiet for a moment. That's why you came. That is the only reason I came. He studied her face for something, some secondary motive, some additional agenda, the way he studied everyone's face for the thing beneath the thing they were saying. He found nothing. which was itself an answer of a kind. "You could have contacted my office," he said. "I tried." She said it without accusation, which made it worse. 4 times over 6 weeks, through 2 different legal representatives and 1 direct written communication. I received a form letter acknowledging receipt on the 4th attempt, 42 days ago. He said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would make that better. "The boys need the information," she said. "That's all this is. I am not here to take money from you. I am not here to renegotiate anything. I am not here to damage your wedding or your business or your reputation." She paused. "Although I recognize that tonight may have complicated some of those things." "May have," he said. A beat. Something that was not quite a smile moved across her face and disappeared immediately. "I'm sorry about the timing. I want you to know that I genuinely considered every other option before choosing this one." "Did you?" "I have 3 children with a potential heart condition and a father who doesn't know they exist," she said. "What would you have done?" He had no answer for that either. He turned back to the window. Below, the lights of Gangnam stretched in every direction, the city he had spent 11 years making himself indispensable to, the territory he had mapped and claimed and defended with a precision that had made him the most feared man in a room full of men who were accustomed to being feared. All of it still there, all of it unchanged. And behind him, on a couch in a hotel suite, 3 small boys with his eyes, and the woman he had discarded without a second thought, and a question about cardiac history that had just reordered everything. "I'll get you the records," he said. "Thank you. All of them, my father's, my grandfather's, mine, everything the family physicians have on file. That's all I need." "It's not all I need," he said. She was quiet. He turned from the window. "I need to meet them," he said. "Properly. Not like this. Not in a hotel suite after a—" He stopped, ran a hand along his jaw. "I need to meet my sons." Amara looked at him for a long moment, not calculating. He'd seen calculating, and this wasn't it. This was something closer to the expression of someone deciding how much weight a particular piece of ground can hold before they're willing to step on it. The boy on the table, Mackay, he was learning to assign the names, had been watching him this entire time with a focused, serious expression that looked incongruous on a toddler's face and yet entirely natural on this particular face. Now, without any visible prompting, Mackay slid off the edge of the table, walked the 4 steps to where Taejun stood near the window, and sat down directly on the floor in front of his feet, as if he had simply decided that this was where he was going to be. Taejun looked down at him. Mackay looked up. This small human being, this person who had existed for 3 years and 4 months without his knowledge, in a city he had never visited, in a life that had been running parallel to his own entirely unobserved, looked up at him with his own eyes and showed no fear whatsoever. And that absence of fear hit Taejun harder than anything else that had happened tonight. He crouched down, got to the boy's eye level. They regarded each other. "Mackay," Taejun said. The boy's mouth curved. Not quite a smile, but the precursor of one, the shape a face makes before it decides whether to fully commit. "Yeah," the boy said, in English, in a voice barely above a whisper. Behind him, Taejun heard Amara draw a single slow breath. He did not look up. He kept his eyes on his son's face, on those impossible familiar eyes, and he understood, with the clarity that comes to a person in the specific moment when the architecture of their carefully constructed life proves insufficient for the actual weight of being human, that the man he had been this morning was not the man who was going to walk out of this room. He just didn't know yet what the new version looked like. The conversation lasted 2 more hours. Amara was systematic. She had brought a leather folder. Of course she had, he thought. Amara had always been the person who brought documentation to every conversation while everyone else brought opinions. And inside it was a medical summary prepared by the boy's cardiologist in Tongyong, a list of specific information required, and a separate section containing, in organized chronological order, the birth certificates, the DNA report commissioned through a licensed laboratory in Busan, and a series of photographs. He didn't ask to see the photographs. She offered them anyway. They were ordinary. That was what undid him, quietly and completely, sitting in that hotel suite with the city spread out beyond the glass. Not dramatic photographs, not milestone events, Just ordinary Tuesday afternoons and Saturday mornings and bedtimes. 3 boys in a bathtub, one of them objecting loudly enough that his mouth was a perfect O. 2 of them asleep on a narrow couch with their faces pressed together and their mouths open. All 3 of them at what appeared to be a small harbor, pointing at fishing boats, in the golden light of a late afternoon that looked like it belonged to a world very far removed from Gangnam. He set the photographs down carefully on the table. "Tongyang," he said. "Yes." "You've been in Tongyang this whole time." "Almost. I spent the first 4 months in Busan. Then I moved." "Why Tongyang?" She considered this question as if it had a real answer that deserved a real response. "It's quiet," she said. "The water is close. I could work remotely. Translation, legal consulting, mostly international contracts. The cost of living allowed me to manage without assistance." A pause. "And it was the kind of place where 3 Nigerian Korean toddlers were unusual enough that people noticed them and took an interest, but small enough that that interest was kind rather than intrusive." He thought about that. "You raised them alone," he said. "I raised them well," she corrected. Not defensively, just precisely. He accepted the correction. Across the room, all 3 boys had fallen asleep. Malik and Micah back on the couch, Makai on a folded blanket that Amara had produced from a bag with the practiced efficiency of a woman who never left the house without a contingency plan. The sleep of children is its own kind of statement, he thought. The capacity to simply shut down in the middle of chaos, to trust that the world will still be there when you wake up. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't." "If I had—" "Don't," she said. Not the same as the first 2 times she'd said it tonight. This time there was something more in it. A weariness, maybe, or the particular firmness of a woman who has already had every version of this conversation with herself and does not need to have it out loud with someone else. "I'm not interested in the conditional," she said. "What you would have done. What might have been different. Those aren't useful questions." She folded her hands in her lap. "The useful questions are the ones in front of us right now. The medical records, whether you want to be involved with your sons going forward, how we manage that if you do. That's what I'm willing to discuss." He studied her. The woman across from him was not the woman he had married 6 years ago, though certain things were unchanged. The stillness, the precision, the quality of complete self-possession that had always made him feel, when he was paying enough attention to feel anything, slightly off balance. But there was something else now, layered beneath that, something denser and less negotiable. The difference between a person who has endured something difficult and a person who has been fundamentally reshaped by it. She had been alone for 3.5 years, in a quiet fishing city, raising 3 children on a translator's income, with no safety net and no assistance, carefully maintaining a DNA file and a medical archive, and a set of birth certificates against the possibility of a future she had not yet decided she wanted. He had been in Seoul, building an empire and preparing a wedding. "I want to be involved," he said. She looked at him. "With the boys," he clarified. "If you'll allow it. I want to know them." Amara was silent for a long moment. "That's not a decision I can make tonight," she said finally. "Or alone. There are conditions." "Tell me." "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight I need to take my sons back to their hotel room and let them sleep in an actual bed. And I need to think. And you need to go handle whatever is happening downstairs." He had, in the last 2 hours, forgotten entirely about what was happening downstairs. He stood. She stood. They faced each other across the low table in the quiet hotel suite, the sleeping boys between them, the city lights behind the glass, and the particular gravity of a moment that has no script. "Amara," he said. She waited. "I'm sorry." The words came out flat and insufficient, which they were. "For the divorce. For the way it was handled. For the—" He stopped. "I know that doesn't—" "It doesn't," she said, simply, without cruelty. "But I heard it." She bent down and gently woke Malik and Micah, and then lifted Makai, who stirred and pressed his face against her neck and went back to sleep almost immediately. She gathered the leather folder and the bag and managed both children and the sleeping boy with the casual competence of someone who has been doing this alone for a very long time. She walked to the door, stopped, turned. "Taejun," she said. He looked at her. "Go back down there," she said. Deal with your life. And when you've done that, when you've actually done that, not managed it or controlled it, but dealt with it, call me. She shifted Mackay slightly on her shoulder. My number is in the folder. Then she opened the door and walked out, and the door swung shut behind her, and Kang Tae-jun stood alone in a hotel suite with 3 children's worth of blankets on the floor and the photographs of a life he hadn't known was happening, and understood that every calculation he had ever made about what mattered was going to have to be recalculated from scratch. He picked up one of the photographs. The harbor. The golden light. 3 small boys pointing at boats. He stood there for a long time. Then he put the photograph in his jacket pocket, straightened his tie, and went back downstairs to face whatever was left of his wedding. The elevator doors closed, and 14 floors below, in the suite where Han So-yeon was waiting for him, Park Do-sik was already there, his phone in his hand. A call just ended, his expression carrying the particular quality of a man who has just recognized an opportunity and is already deciding how to use it. The elevator took 11 seconds to descend 14 floors. Tae-jun counted them. Not because he needed to, but because his mind, which had spent the last 2 hours in entirely unfamiliar territory, was reaching for something mechanical to hold on to. Numbers. Sequence. The reliable logic of one thing following another. 11 seconds, 14 floors, 217 guests who were either still in the ballroom or had dispersed into the hotel's bars and corridors and private rooms, carrying what they had witnessed tonight like currency they hadn't yet decided how to spend. The doors opened. The hallway outside the ballroom was not empty. 3 of his personal security detail were positioned at intervals along the corridor, large men in dark suits who had the particular quality of complete stillness that comes from training, not temperament. They registered his appearance with the micro-adjustments of people accustomed to reading their employer's condition from a distance. None of them spoke. None of them needed to. He walked past them. The ballroom itself had been cleared. The guests moved to the adjoining reception hall by the hotel staff with the smooth efficiency that high-end venues develop for exactly these kinds of situations. Because high-end venues in Gangnam have learned that the occasions that require the most delicate management are not the ordinary disasters, but the ones involving the most powerful guests. The white peonies were still on the altar. The crystal chandeliers were still lit. The chairs were still arranged in their precise rows. The program still sitting on their seats, the room still holding the particular hush of a ceremony that had been interrupted before it could conclude. He didn't go into the ballroom. He went to the private suite on the 22nd floor. He knocked. The door opened immediately, which meant she had been standing near it, which meant she had been waiting, which was not something Han So-yeon did. Waiting was a posture she associated with weakness, and she had spent her adult life engineering situations in which other people waited for her. She stepped back to let him in. The suite was larger than the hospitality suite on the 14, a full living area, a bedroom beyond a set of double doors, a terrace overlooking the same lit grid of Gangnam. The ivory wedding dress was gone. She had changed into something dark and simple, and the elaborate hair was down, and the diamond earrings were on the table beside a glass of something amber that was mostly gone. Park Do-sik was sitting on the couch. Tae-jun stopped. The 3 of them occupied the room in a triangle. Tae-jun at the door, So-yeon near the terrace, Park on the couch with his ankle crossed over his knee and his expression arranged in something that was trying to be concern and landing closer to calculation. "What are you doing here?" Tae-jun said. To Park. "So-yeon called me." Park uncrossed his ankle, set both feet on the floor. "She was upset. I didn't ask what you thought." Tae-jun looked at So-yeon. "Why did you call him?" "Because someone had to actually manage what happened tonight," So-yeon said. Her voice was composed now, completely, almost artificially composed, the way glass looks solid until the exact moment it breaks. "While you were upstairs with her." "Managing it? How?" 3 journalists were in the ballroom, Tae-jun. I identified them inside the first 20 minutes because I know how to read a room, which is apparently something I do better than whoever you have doing security. She picked up the glass, put it down without drinking. I had 2 of them removed before they could make calls. The third, she glanced at Park. "Being handled," Park said. "By who?" "By people who handle things." Park stood. He was a big man, not as tall as Tae-jun, but broader. with the particular solidity of someone who had put on weight in his 40s and carried it well. That's not the issue right now. The issue is what happened in that ballroom and what you're going to do about it. What I'm going to do about it, Taijun said, is not your concern. Something moved in Park's face, brief, controlled, gone in a second. It is when it affects the syndicate. The syndicate is mine. The syndicate belongs to everyone who's invested blood and capital in it for the last 11 years, Park said. His voice stayed level. Including me. And what happened tonight? A woman appearing from nowhere with 3 children claiming to be yours in front of every significant alliance partner we have. She's not claiming anything, Taejun said. They're mine. Silence. So-yeon set the glass down on the table with a sound that was slightly too sharp for the weight of the glass. You know that, Park said. Not a question. Yes. How? Because I looked at them. Taejun said it flatly, without apology. And because the math is not complicated. Park was quiet for a moment, then, who is she? Her name is Amara Okoye. She was my wife. Was. So-yeon's voice from across the room, the single word delivered with surgical precision. We divorced 3 years ago, Taejun said. She was pregnant when she left. I didn't know. You didn't know, Park repeated. No. Or you chose not to know. The air in the room changed. It was a small thing. A degree of temperature, a fractional shift in the quality of the silence. But Taejun registered it with the full-body attentiveness of a man who had survived 11 years in a world where the small changes were the ones that killed you. He looked at Park. Clarify that, he said quietly. Park held his gaze for 2 seconds. 3. Long enough to make a point without making a mistake. Then he said, I only mean that it's an unusual oversight for a man in your position to not know something like that about someone that close to you. She left the country, Taejun said. She was careful. She was careful, Park said. Or you were incurious. Another beat. Either way, it's done. The question is what we do with it. I already told you. Not your concern. 3 potential heirs to the Kang Syndicate leadership, appearing in public at a high-profile event attended by everyone from Governor Lim to the Incheon Port Authority. That is, in fact, everyone's concern. Park moved to the bar cart, poured 2 fingers of something, set it down without drinking it. The council will want to know your position. My position on what? On your sons. On the woman. On whether any of this constitutes a vulnerability. Taejun crossed the room. He stopped close enough to Park that the size difference between them became a physical fact rather than an abstraction. Park did not step back, which was either courage or a very well-calibrated performance of it. Call another word, any of them, a vulnerability, Taejun said, and I will restructure this conversation in a way you won't enjoy. Park met his eyes. Understood, Park said. He said it smoothly, without any visible distress, and picked up the untouched glass and walked to the terrace door and stood looking out at the city. And Taejun watched him go and felt, beneath the adrenaline and the anger and the 18 other things moving through him simultaneously, the faint and specific unease of a man who has just recognized that a door he thought was closed has been open for longer than he realized. So-yeon had watched the entire exchange from her position near the table without moving. Now she said, I'd like to speak to my husband alone. Of course, Park said. He finished the drink, set the glass on the terrace railing, came back inside and retrieved his jacket from the back of the couch. Taejun, we'll talk tomorrow. We will, Taejun said. Park left. The door clicked shut behind him. So-yeon and Taejun stood in the suite in the specific kind of silence that accumulates in the space between 2 people who have just watched the version of their life they thought they were living dissolve into a different shape entirely. So-yeon spoke first. Were you in love with her? That's not the... Answer the question. He looked at her. No. But you were married to her. You know that. I told you before You told me you'd been in an arranged marriage. You told me it had ended. You told me she had gone back to the States. She picked up the glass again, and this time she drank from it and set it down empty. You did not tell me there was any possibility of children. Because I didn't know. You also, she said, cutting cleanly through the sentence, did not tell me you had systematically blocked her access to you for 3 years, which is what she told the journalist before Doshik's people got to him. She met his eyes. Which means there are things you knew were problems and chose not to tell me. He said nothing. I'm not asking you to justify it, So-yeon said. I'm asking you to understand that what I am processing right now is not simply a surprise. It is the specific experience of realizing that the man I have spent 2 years building a future with has been editing the truth in a way that makes certain things he told me retroactively untrue. I didn't lie to you. No, she agreed. You withheld. There's a distinction that matters to you. I'm telling you, it doesn't matter to me. He sat down. It was the first time he had sat down since the ballroom, and the simple act of it, weight on the furniture, feet on the floor, registered something in his body, a kind of gravity returning. He put his elbows on his knees, looked at the carpet. She came here for medical records, he said. The boys may have a cardiac condition. She needs my family history. That's all she wants? That's what she said. And you believe her. He thought about Amara in the hospitality suite, the leather folder, the organized documentation, the photographs of ordinary Tuesday afternoons. Yes, he said. So-yeon was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down on the opposite end of the couch, not close, but in the same space, which felt like a deliberate decision. Then give her the records, she said. Have your legal team compile everything. Send it through a neutral intermediary. Done. It's not that simple. Why? Because they're my sons. So-yeon looked at him. 3 of them, he said. 3 years old. In Tongyong. And I didn't know they existed. And she raised them alone. And he stopped, pressed 2 fingers to his jaw where the scar was. I need to know them. You need, So-yeon said quietly. Yes. What does that mean for us, Taejun, for tonight? For the ceremony that is still technically unfinished? He looked at her. She looked back and her face was doing something complex, containing multiple things at once, the way faces do when the situation has outpaced the emotional vocabulary available for it. There was anger in there, and something that might have been hurt, though So-yeon wore hurt the way most people wear injuries, privately, covered, only visible if you knew exactly where to look. And underneath both of those things, something more pragmatic. A woman making calculations. I don't know, he said. Not tonight. She nodded once. A single precise movement. Then I think, she said, you should sleep somewhere else. He slept in a different suite. Or he didn't sleep. He lay in the dark of a different room in the same hotel and stared at the ceiling and turned the photograph over in his fingers until the edges went soft. The harbor photograph. Golden light. 3 boys pointing at boats. At 4 a.m, his phone rang. Park. He answered. You need to see something, Park said. No preamble, no apology for the hour. What? Not on the phone. Come down to the business center. It's 4 a.m. I know what time it is. A pause. Come down, Taejun. He went down. The business center was on the 3rd floor. A long room with conference tables and presentation screens, and the particular fluorescent neutrality of corporate space. Park was already there. He was not alone. Beside him stood a man named Shin Woo-jin, who was the syndicate's head of information management, which was a title that meant he found and controlled the things that other people didn't want found or controlled. On the presentation screen behind them was a collection of documents. What is this? Taejun said. This, Park said, is the beginning of what tonight is going to become if we don't move quickly. He clicked to the first document. Child welfare complaint. Filed with the Tongyong District Office 46 days ago. Anonymous. Alleging that 3 minor children in the household of one Amara Okoye are being raised in an environment of financial instability and social isolation. Taejun looked at the screen. Someone already knew about them. Someone has been watching for longer than tonight. Park clicked to the next document. Financial audit request. Filed with the Kang Group's external auditors 3 weeks ago. Source. Again, anonymous. Requesting a full review of discretionary spending over the last 18 months, specifically targeting transfers that might constitute undisclosed paternal support payments. There were no support payments. I didn't know they existed. The audit doesn't care what you knew. It cares what it can make look true. Park clicked again. And this one. A journalist, not the ones from tonight, a different one, based in Busan, has been compiling a piece for the last 6 weeks. Kang Syndicate chairman's hidden family, abandoned wife, 3 secret heirs. Goes to press in 4 days unless someone stops it. Tae-jun stood in the fluorescent light of the business center at 4 in the morning and looked at the documentation of a campaign that had been running for 6 weeks without his knowledge, and something settled into place in his chest, cold and very clear, the way things get clear when the emotional noise burns off, and what's underneath is just the clean architecture of a problem. Someone had known about the boys before tonight. Someone had been building something. Who filed the welfare complaint, he said. We don't know yet. The audit request? Routed through a shell entity, Shin's tracing it. The journalist? His last known source contact was in Seoul, high-end district, the kind of neighborhood where people have things to protect. Park paused. The kind of neighborhood where So-yeon grew up. Tae-jun turned his head slowly and looked at Park. Park looked back without flinching. I'm not making an accusation, he said. I'm telling you what the geography suggests. So-yeon didn't know about the boys until tonight. She didn't know their names, Park said carefully. She didn't know they were triplets. She didn't know where they were living. He paused. But someone could have told her 3 months ago that your former wife was alive in Korea and had children without giving her the specifics, and she could have begun to manage that risk without telling you. Why would she do that without telling me? Because, Park said, the existence of your children complicates the inheritance structure, the Kang family assets, the syndicate succession, all of it. If those boys are legitimately acknowledged, everything So-yeon expected to inherit as your wife becomes, he paused, negotiated. Tae-jun was very still. And who, he said, his voice quiet in a way that people who knew him understood to be more dangerous than volume, would benefit from a situation where both So-yeon and I are destabilized simultaneously? Park said nothing. Tae-jun looked at him. At the broad, composed face, the careful eyes, the expression of a man who had just delivered information and was waiting, with great patience, to see what the recipient would do with it. You've been watching this develop for 6 weeks, Tae-jun said. I became aware of it 12 days ago. And you're telling me now? I'm telling you now, Park confirmed. Why not 12 days ago? A pause that lasted precisely long enough to mean something. I needed to understand the full picture before I brought it to you, Park said. Incomplete information in a situation this complex would have been more harmful than, you needed to understand the full picture, Tae-jun repeated. Yes. Or you needed the situation to develop far enough that it was too complicated to untangle quickly. Park's expression didn't change. It was a masterwork of non-change, every muscle held in deliberate neutrality, the face of a man who had spent decades learning to give nothing away and had become excellent at it. That's an extraordinary accusation, Park said. It's not an accusation, Tae-jun said. It's an observation. There's a distinction that matters to me. He used So-yeon's words deliberately. He watched to see if Park registered them. Park registered them. A flicker, barely anything, gone instantly. But there. Go home, Tae-jun said. Both of you. I'll be in touch tomorrow. Tae-jun, the journalist's deadline is Go home, Do-shik. Shin Woo-jin was already gathering his laptop and his folder and moving toward the door with the practiced efficiency of a man who reads rooms for a living. Park took longer. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the presentation screen, still lit, the document still displayed. He looked at Tae-jun. Whatever you're thinking, Park said, be careful. I'm always careful, Tae-jun said. You weren't careful 3 years ago, and look where that's brought us. He left. The door closed. Tae-jun stood alone in the business center and looked at the documents on the screen, the welfare complaint, the audit request, the journalist's draft, and understood that whatever was happening was not a reaction to tonight. Tonight had simply been the public detonation of something that had been assembled piece by piece over weeks, by people who had known things he hadn't. The question was whether Amara knew, whether she had walked into his wedding tonight not only to get medical records, but also because someone had told her that this moment, the most public, most exposed, most irreversible moment, was her best protection. He thought about the leather folder, The organized documentation, the birth certificates and the DNA reports and the medical summaries, all filed in chronological order, all in perfect condition. He thought about what she'd said. Every other door was closed. She hadn't said who had closed them. He picked up his phone and looked at her number, which he had added to his contacts in the elevator on the way back down from the 14th floor. He looked at it for a long time. He did not call her at 4 in the morning, but he also did not go back to his room. He sat in the business center chair and looked at the documents and thought about 3 small boys in a harbor in Golden Light, and about a woman who had spent 3 years building a paper fortress around her children, and about the specific kind of intelligence required to walk into the most dangerous room in Seoul and do it without fear. He sat with that thought until the sky outside the business center's narrow windows began to change. Not sunrise yet, just the first gray suggestion of it, the city shifting from black to something darker than blue. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and made 2 calls. The first was to his personal physician. The second was to his family's private archive administrator, a 70-year-old man named Choi, who had managed the Kang family's medical and legal documentation for 31 years, and who answered the phone on the second ring despite the hour, because Choi had spent 3 decades learning that the Kang family's needs did not arrange themselves around daylight. Everything, Tae-jun told him, my file, my father's, my grandfather's, any cardiac documentation, any hereditary condition flagged in the last 3 generations. I need it compiled and ready for transfer by 8 this morning. To your office? Choi said. To wherever I tell you. He hung up. Then he went back to his room and showered and changed and sat by the window until 8 o'clock, at which point he called Amara. She answered on the 3rd ring. The records are ready, he said. A pause. That was fast. You said the boys needed them. Another pause, longer. He heard something in the background. A small voice, one of them, asking something he couldn't make out, and her response low and calm in English. Then she came back to the phone. Where? She said. Wherever you're comfortable. I'll come to you. No? Immediate. There's a cafe on Dosan Daero called Hyun's. I know the owner. We'll meet there at 10. All right. Alone, she said. Yes. Tae-jun. Her voice shifted. Not softer exactly, but more deliberate. I heard about the welfare complaint last night. He went still. How? My lawyer called me at 6 this morning. Apparently whoever filed it also sent a copy to a child advocacy organization in Tongyang. They contacted my neighbor who contacted me. A beat. Someone has been building a case against me, against my fitness as a parent. I know, he said. Silence. You know, she said. I found out last night, after we spoke. And you were going to tell me this when exactly? At 10, he said. At Hyun's cafe. I was going to tell you everything I know. The silence this time was different. The silence of a person recalibrating, adjusting the weight they're placing on a particular piece of ground. 10 o'clock, she said. 10 o'clock. She hung up. Hyun's cafe was small and warm and smelled of roasted barley tea and old wood, the kind of place that had existed in its particular form for so long that it had become structurally indistinguishable from the neighborhood around it. The owner, a compact woman in her 50s, who greeted Amara by name and directed a single long assessing look at Tae-jun before showing them to a back table, had clearly been briefed on the general category of the meeting without being given the specifics, because she brought tea without being asked and did not return. The boys were not there. Amara had left them with someone she trusted, which told him she had resources in Seoul he hadn't known about, which told him she had been planning this visit more carefully than even the leather folder had suggested. She sat across from him. He put the medical file on the table between them. It was thick. 3 generations of cardiac history flagged and indexed by Choi in the 3 hours between Tae-jun's call and this meeting. She looked at it, but didn't immediately reach for it. Tell me what you know, she said. He told her. All of it. The welfare complaint, the audit, the journalist in Busan, the timeline. 6 weeks of coordinated pressure, assembled before last night, before the ballroom, before any of it became public. He watched her face as he talked, and what he saw there was not panic, but something more disciplined than that. The expression of a person absorbing information they have already have prepared for, cross-referencing it against their own knowledge in real time. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The welfare complaint," she said. "The anonymous source. Did your man trace it?" "Not yet. By this afternoon, possibly." "I can tell you now," she said. "Or I can tell you what I think, which is not the same as knowing." She wrapped both hands around her tea. 49 days ago, 3 days before the complaint was filed, a woman came into the translation agency I contract with in Tongyang. She said she was looking for a legal consultant for an international contract matter. My colleague referred her to me. We spoke twice by phone. And she asked questions that, at the time, seemed like normal background vetting. My credentials, how long I'd been in Tongyang, whether I had family support locally, whether I had financial backing or was operating independently. She paused. She never actually commissioned any work. She stopped returning calls after the second conversation. Taejun looked at her. "Describe her." "Late 30s, Korean, well-dressed without being ostentatious, very composed. She introduced herself as a representative of a consulting firm called Daesun Partners." Taejun set his tea down. "Daesun Partners," he said. "You know it." "It's a shell company," he said. "It's one of 8 shell companies that Park Do-shik uses to move money laterally through the syndicate's financial structure without creating a direct paper trail." Amara absorbed this without visible reaction. "Your second in command," she said. "Yes." "Has been running surveillance on me for at least 7 weeks." "Yes." She looked at him across the table, and what was in her eyes was not fear or anger, but something more complex and more exhausting than either. The expression of a woman who has spent 3 years building carefully and methodically against exactly this kind of threat, and has just discovered that the threat was closer and earlier than she calculated. "He knew about the boys," she said, "before last night." "He must have." "Which means last night wasn't a surprise to him." "No," Taejun said. "I think for Park, last night was a trigger, something he let happen because it served a purpose." "What purpose?" "Destabilizing me," Taejun said, publicly, in front of every significant witness he could assemble, making me look like a man who doesn't control his own life. He paused. "And simultaneously creating a paper record that could be used against you, welfare complaints, financial irregularities, that would give him leverage over the situation regardless of which direction it developed." She thought about this. "If you acknowledge the boys," she said slowly, "the inheritance structure of the Kang assets becomes complicated. If you didn't acknowledge them, if the story broke publicly without acknowledgement, your credibility with the council collapses. Either way, he gets movement. Either way, something shifts that he can exploit." "Yes." "And so Jan?" He said nothing. "Was she part of it?" Amara asked. "I don't know yet." "That's not the same as no." "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at the medical file on the table. She reached out and pulled it toward her and opened it, and for a moment she simply read. Scanning the first pages, checking the format of the documentation, the credentials of the compiling physician. Her hands were steady. He noticed that. The steadiness of them. "The boy's cardiologist needs this by Friday," she said. "She's running the full panel next week." "What are the specific findings so far?" She looked up. Something shifted slightly in her expression. Not a lowering of the guard exactly, but an adjustment of the distance. "Mitral valve irregularity. All 3 of them. Micah's is the most pronounced. It may be nothing. A structural variation that requires only monitoring, or it may require intervention." She paused. "We won't know until the panel." "What kind of intervention?" "Possibly surgical, possibly just medication and restricted activity. Dr. Yoon doesn't want to project until she has the full picture." He sat with that. 3 small boys with his eyes and a structural problem in the organ that kept them alive. In a city 3 hours away, in a life he had not known was happening. "I want to be there," he said. "When the results come back, I want to be in Tongyang." She closed the medical file, looked at him directly. "That's not something I can decide right now." "I know." "There are conditions. I told you that last night." "Tell me now." "Not here," she said. "Not today." I need to get this file to Dr. Yoon, and I need to talk to my lawyer about the welfare complaint, and I need to... She stopped, took a breath that was slightly longer than usual. The first crack, small and quickly sealed in the composure she'd maintained since he'd sat down. I need a day, Tae-jun. Give me 1 day. He nodded. She stood and picked up the file and her bag, and then she stopped. Be careful, she said. Whatever is happening with Park, be careful. He knew things he shouldn't have known for longer than he told you. That means there are other things he knows that he hasn't told you yet. I know. I mean it. She met his eyes. Whatever you think you know about him, double it. Then she walked out, and the cafe settled back into its ordinary sounds. And Tae-jun sat with his cooling tea and the weight of everything he'd just confirmed, and thought about Park Do-shik's face in the business center at 4 a.m. So composed, so careful, the face of a man managing information rather than sharing it. He found out about So Yeon at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Not from Park, not from Shin Woo-jin, from a source he hadn't expected, his own mother. Kang Myung-hee called him from the ancestral estate in Yonggin at 2:07 p.m., and she did not begin with pleasantries because Kang Myung-hee had not used pleasantries as an opener in approximately 40 years. You need to come to Yonggin, she said. I'm in Seoul. I know where you are. I know what happened last night. I know about the children. A pause. I also know something you don't. Come to Yonggin. He drove himself. 1 hour and 14 minutes, taking the back roads because he needed the time and the motion, something to do with his body, while his mind worked through the geometry of everything he knew and everything he suspected. The countryside south of Seoul was green and still and completely indifferent to the particular crisis occurring inside the black car, moving through it at carefully controlled speed. The Kang estate was old money made visible in stone and wood and land, a property that had been in the family for 3 generations, managed with the same undemonstrative permanence that characterized everything his mother touched. The gates opened before he reached them. The housekeeper met him at the door. His mother was in the receiving room, sitting in a high-backed chair by the window with a cup of tea and the particular quality of absolute stillness that Tae-jun had always suspected he had inherited directly from her. She was 71 years old and looked 60 and moved like 50, and had, in the course of her life, done things that Tae-jun knew about only in outline because the details were not something she had ever seen fit to share. She looked at him when he entered. Sit, she said. He sat. Tell me about the children first, she said. Your version. He told her. All of it. Amara, the triplets, the medical situation, what he'd found in the business center at 4 a.m. He told it without editorializing, the way he'd learned to present information to her, bashas, plainly, in sequence, without the emotional inflection that she had always treated as imprecision. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, then, she raised them alone. Yes. For 3 years. Nearly 4. His mother looked out the window. The garden beyond the glass was immaculate. Sculpted shrubs, raked gravel, the permanent order of a space that had been tended with absolute consistency. I arranged your first marriage, she said. I chose her because her family had connections we needed, and because I had read her background and I believed she had the character to manage what being part of this family requires. A pause. I was right about the second thing. I did not adequately account for what you would do with it. He said nothing because there was nothing to say. The children, she said. The triplets. Are they? They're mine, he said, without question. She nodded once, the same precise nod he'd seen on Amara's face yesterday, and the recognition of it landed strangely. Then we will discuss what that means for the family structure. Later. She turned from the window. First, I need to show you something. She reached beside her chair and picked up a tablet. His mother, who did not use technology as a rule and had an assistant for everything digital, and held it out to him. On the screen was an email chain. He took the tablet and read. It took him 4 minutes to read it completely, and during those 4 minutes the room was completely silent except for the sound of his own breathing, which he became aware of somewhere around the second minute because it had changed, had become slightly slower and more deliberate, the breathing of a body managing a very significant stress response. The email chain was between 2 addresses. One belonged to Han So-yeon. He recognized it. He'd seen it on 1,000 messages over 2 years. The other resolved, when he checked the header, to a domain registered to Daisun Partners, Park Do-shik's shell company. The chain was 11 weeks old. It began with a message from Soyeon that was careful, artfully casual, nothing that could be called explicit, asking whether a mutual contact had any information about the status of Tae-jun's former marriage, whether the former wife had remained in the country, whether there were any, she used the word complications, that might affect the upcoming wedding and its legal implications. The response was immediate. And over the following 11 weeks, the chain developed, carefully, incrementally, with the practiced caution of two people who understood they were building something that needed to be deniable into a working collaboration. Soyeon providing access to Tae-jun's personal calendar, his private schedule, the details of his security arrangements. Park providing the intelligence he had assembled on Amara, her location, her work, the names of her children, their school, their doctor, the welfare complaint he was preparing to file, the journalist he was preparing to brief. And at week 9, a single message from Soyeon that contained 4 words. The wedding is confirmed, followed by Park's response, then we're ready. Tae-jun set the tablet down on his knee. His hands, he noticed, were entirely still. That was the thing about genuine rage, the deep structural kind, the kind that doesn't spike and recede but settles into the foundation of a person. It didn't express itself in shaking. It expressed itself in the opposite of shaking, in an absolute cessation of unnecessary movement, as if the body were conserving every resource for what came next. "Where did you get this?" he said. His voice was level. He was very proud of how level it was. "Do-shik's assistant," his mother said. "A young man who has been with the syndicate for 4 years and who came to me 6 days ago because he was afraid of what he was watching develop and didn't know where else to take it." 6 days ago, Tae-jun said. "Yes. You've had this for 6 days. I needed to verify it," she said, without apology. "I needed to be certain before I brought it to you. Accusing your second-in-command and your fiancé of conspiracy requires certainty." He stood up. He walked to the window where his mother had been looking out at the garden, and he stood there with his back to the room and looked at the sculpted shrubs and the raked gravel and the permanent order of it. Soyeon had known. Not about the triplets specifically. The emails confirmed she hadn't known about 3 children, hadn't known they were in Korea, hadn't known anything beyond the suggestion that complications existed. But she had known that Amara was alive and potentially present, and she had decided not to tell him, and she had decided instead to work in parallel with the man who was currently positioned as Tae-jun's most trusted lieutenant to manage the situation in a direction that served them both. She had chosen Park over him. She had shared his calendar, his security details, his private schedule, with a man who was building a case to take his empire apart. He thought about her face at the altar, the cold fingers, the composed expression that had seemed last night like shock. He reassessed that now, reassessed everything in the light of what he'd just read, the way you reassess a room when someone turns the lights on, and the shapes that were ambiguous in the dark resolve into things you should have recognized sooner. Not shock. Management. She had known something was coming. She had simply not known exactly when or how. "Do-shik's assistant," he said, still facing the window. "Is he safe?" "He is here," his mother said, "on the estate. I brought him 2 days ago." He turned. His mother was watching him with the expression she had worn throughout his childhood and adolescence. The expression of a woman who loved something and had chosen, for most of its life, to express that love through demands rather than softness, because softness had never been the language of survival in the world she inhabited. There was something else in it now, though, something he didn't see often. Worry. "Tae-jun," she said. "I know. If Do-shik understands that the assistant has come to me, I know, Mother. The council meeting is in 9 days. If he moves before that, I know." He crossed the room and crouched down in front of her chair, which put him at her eye level, something he hadn't done since he was a child, and looked at her directly. "I need you to do something." "What?" "I need you to call Amara Okoye." His mother's expression shifted. "Her number will be in the file I'm going to send you in the next 10 minutes, he said. "I need you to call her and tell her that the situation has changed and that she and the boys need to be somewhere safe for the next 72 hours. Don't explain everything. Just tell her it's necessary and that I asked. She'll listen to you. Maybe, but she'll listen to you faster because you're not the one she's deciding whether to trust yet. He held his mother's eyes. And because you're the one who put her in this family in the first place. She knows what that means. His mother was quiet for a long moment. You're going after Doshik, she said. Yes. And so Jan. Yes. Before the council meeting. Before the council meeting. He stood. I can't wait 9 days. If he finds out that Shin has traced Daesun partners, or that his assistant came to you, he'll move first, and I'll be spending the council meeting defending myself against accusations I won't have had time to disprove. And the woman, Amara? She's been building a paper archive for 3.5 years, he said. Every document, every record, every piece of evidence that establishes exactly who she is and what her relationship to this family is. She told me she kept it to protect her children. He reached for his jacket. I think she kept it because she knew, somewhere underneath everything, that someday the people around me would try to weaponize her children against me, and she wanted to make sure that when that happened, she had the cleanest possible hands and the strongest possible record. His mother looked at him. She's smarter than you, she said. Not unkindly, simply as a fact. In some ways, he said. Yes. He buttoned his jacket. He was already calculating, already mapping the next 72 hours the way he mapped everything. Sequence, resource, pressure point, outcome. Park Doshik had 9 days and 11 weeks of preparation and the advantage of having moved first and quietly and with the specific confidence of a man who believes his target doesn't know he's a target. What Park didn't know was that the target had spent the night sitting in a fluorescent room asking exactly the right questions. What Park didn't know was that a 26-year-old assistant with a conscience had walked to Yongan 6 days ago and handed the entire architecture of the conspiracy to the one person in the Kang family who had been outmaneuvering men like Park Doshik since before Park Doshik had learned to tie his own shoes. And what Park didn't know, what neither Park nor So Yan had apparently factored into their 11 weeks of careful planning, was that the woman they had chosen to use as a weapon had spent 3.5 years in a quiet fishing city building, something that was not a weapon at all, but was, it turned out, considerably more dangerous. He called Shin Woo-jin from the car on the way back to Seoul. I need everything you have on Daesun Partners, he said. Every transaction, every registered contact, every shell layer between it and Doshik's personal accounts. I need it documented, sourced, and legally presentable. Legally presentable, Shin repeated, with the careful inflection of a man who was recalibrating which direction the wind was blowing. I'm not handling this the usual way, Taejun said. A pause. How long do I have? 48 hours? That's 48 hours, Woo-jin. Silence. Then, understood. He hung up. The road south of Yongin merged back into the sprawl of Greater Seoul, the density returning gradually, buildings thickening, traffic accumulating, the city reasserting itself around the car the way a river closes over a stone. He drove through it and thought about Park Do-shik in the specific way he thought about serious problems. Not emotionally, not yet, but architecturally. Mapping the structure, finding the load-bearing points, identifying the place where, if you applied precise pressure, the whole thing came down. Park's play was elegant in its basic design. Taejun could acknowledge that without pleasure. It had 3 components working simultaneously: the public destabilization through the wedding disruption, the legal pressure through the welfare complaint and the audit, and the narrative pressure through the journalist. Any one of them alone was manageable. Together, coordinated, they were designed to create a situation where Taejun was reacting on 3 fronts at once, unable to be fully strategic on any of them, while Park positioned himself to the council as the stable alternative. The flaw in the design, the single load-bearing point that Park had miscalculated, was Amara. Park had treated her as a variable, a piece to be moved. He had assumed that a woman alone in a fishing city with 3 small children and no institutional support was a vulnerability to be exploited rather than a person with agency. He had built his entire campaign around the idea that the existence of Taejun's children was a weakness. He had not considered that the woman who had raised those children had spent 3 years preparing for exactly this. Taejun turned onto the expressway. He called Amara. She answered on the second ring this time. I need to see you again, he said. Tonight, if possible. A pause. He heard the background of wherever she was. Something quiet, the faint sound of what might have been a television in another room turned low, one of the boys saying something indistinct. What's happened? She said. Not a question. I'll tell you in person. Tell me now. I need to know if I should be moving the boys. He made a decision. So Jan was working with Park for 11 weeks. She gave him access to my schedule and my security details. He gave her intelligence on you, your location, the boys, the welfare complaint he was preparing. The silence on the other end of the line had a specific texture, the silence of someone receiving information that confirmed something they had already suspected and finding that confirmation both satisfying and terrible. She knew about me, Amar said. She knew you existed. She didn't know about the triplets specifically. But she knew there was something to manage. Yes. Another silence. Then, the woman who called my translation agency 49 days ago. Almost certainly one of Park's people. She had my address, Taejun. Her voice was still level, but something underneath it had shifted. A density, a weight, the particular quality of a person who is only now grasping the full perimeter of the thing that has been surrounding them. She knew where the boys went to school. She mentioned it, casually, like background detail. I thought she was thorough. I didn't think... She stopped. I know. My sons, she said, very quietly. They're safe. My mother is going to call you. I want you to go where she tells you to go for the next 72 hours. Your mother. She has the emails. She has the assistant who brought them to her. She's been sitting on this for 6 days because she needed to be certain before she moved. And now she's certain. Now she's certain. He heard her breathing, slow, deliberate, the breathing of a woman putting something back into order inside herself. All right, she said. I'll listen to what she says. Amara. What? He was on the expressway now, the city spreading in every direction, the late afternoon light hitting the glass towers of Gangnam and fracturing into 100 separate glints. I'm sorry, he said. Not the generic version. I mean, specifically, for making you someone that people could use as a weapon against me. For the situation that made that possible. She was quiet for a long moment. Handle it, she said. That's what I need from you right now. Not apologies. Handle it. She hung up. He drove. Park Do-shik's office in the Kang Group's Gangnam Tower was on the 31st floor, 2 floors below Taejun's own, and it was a room that Park had occupied and slowly, over 11 years, made his own. The furniture upgraded incrementally. The art on the walls shifted from corporate neutrality to something more personal. The view of the Han River claimed with the quiet possessiveness of a man who had decided the space belonged to him before anyone had officially said so. Taejun arrived there at 6:45 in the evening. Park was still at his desk. He looked up when Taejun entered, and his expression did the thing it had done in the business center. The micro-adjustment, the rapid recalibration, the immediate reassembly of composure. He did it very well. He had always done it very well. I wasn't expecting you, Park said. I know. Taejun closed the door behind him. He didn't sit. He stood in the middle of the room and looked at Park across the desk, and the quality of his stillness, that absolute conserving stillness, was something Park registered because his hands, which had been resting loosely on the desk surface, shifted slightly. Almost nothing. But there. I spoke to my mother today, Taejun said. How is she? Thorough, Taejun said. As always. Park waited. She sends her regards, Taejun said. And she asked me to tell you that she's always believed you were a man of considerable capability. That's kind of her. She also asked me to tell you that she has, in her possession, 11 weeks of email correspondence between you and Han So-yeon, routed through a Daesun Partners domain, that documents in considerable detail the nature of your collaborative arrangement. He paused. She said to tell you that specifically. So there was no ambiguity. The room was very quiet. Park's face did something it had never in 11 years done in Taejun's presence. It went still in the wrong way, not the controlled stillness of a composed man, but the rigid stillness of a man whose internal system has just encountered something it did not have a prepared response for and is running emergency protocols while the surface tries to hold. That's a serious allegation, Park said. His voice was good, almost perfect. The faintest texture in it that wouldn't have been perceptible to anyone who hadn't spent 11 years listening to Park Do-shik manage situations with his voice. It's not an allegation, Tae-jun said. It's a description of documents. Documents can be fabricated. They can, Tae-jun agreed. These weren't. The headers trace, the domain registration traces, the IP addresses of the sending devices trace. He let a beat pass. Shin is thorough too. Something moved in Park's jaw. What do you want? Park said. Right now? Nothing from you. Tae-jun moved to the window, not turning his back, just shifting his angle, looking at the Han River and the city arranged around it in the early evening light. I want you to understand the situation clearly because I think you're accustomed to being the person in the room who understands the situation most clearly, and I want you to have the experience of that not being true. Park said nothing. You built something clever, Tae-jun said. Genuinely. The three-front approach, legal, narrative, public, that was well designed. The timeline was disciplined. The use of So-yeon as an internal access point was smart. He turned from the window. The mistake was Amara. You treated her as a passive element, Tae-jun said. You treated her as a woman in a difficult situation who could be pressured from three sides simultaneously and would have no resources to push back. You didn't investigate what she actually was, what she had actually built in 3 years, specifically to protect herself and her children from people who might try to use them. Park looked at him. She has documentation, Tae-jun said, more thorough than yours. DNA reports, medical records, financial history, every legal interaction with the Kong family over the last 3.5 years. Organized, verified, legally presentable. She has a record that proves, unambiguously, that she has never attempted to extract money from this family, never attempted to leverage the children, never attempted anything other than raising 3 boys quietly in a city where no one was looking. He paused. And now she has your welfare complaint, and the audit request, and the journalist you briefed, all of which, set against her documentation, don't look like protecting the public interest. They look like a coordinated campaign to intimidate a private citizen who has legal standing in this family. The color in Park's face had changed. The council, he started. The council, Tae-jun said, is going to receive a complete package in 72 hours, prepared by my legal team and cross-referenced against Amar's archive. It will document the conspiracy, the methods, the timeline, and the specific ways in which you use the existence of my children, Do-shik, as instruments in a political campaign. He moved toward the desk, stopped on the near side of it, close enough that the physical reality of the distance between them was a fact in the room. And you are going to do nothing between now and then. You're going to sit in this office or go home or do whatever it is you do in the hours when you're not dismantling things that belong to other people, and you are going to wait. And if I don't, Park said, quietly, with the last remnant of the composure he'd been maintaining. Then I stop being patient, Tae-jun said, and I'm very much hoping, for your sake, that I don't have to stop being patient. He held Park's eyes for 3 full seconds. Then he turned and walked to the door. Tae-jun, Park's voice from behind him. Something in it that was not quite the voice he'd used for the last 11 years. Something rawer, stripped of a layer. I was your brother, in every way that counted. Tae-jun stopped with his hand on the door. He did not turn. You were, he said. He opened the door and walked out, and the elevator at the end of the corridor carried him down 31 floors in silence. And when he stepped out into the lobby of the Kang Group Tower, the evening air outside the glass doors was cool, and the city was doing what it always did. Moving, indifferent, enormous, the million separate lives of it proceeding without any awareness of what had just happened on the 31st floor. His phone buzzed, a message from his mother. 3 words, she is here. He stood on the pavement outside his own building in the cooling evening air and read those 3 words, and something in his chest, something that had been locked into that conserving stillness since 4 in the morning, released a fraction, just a fraction. Enough. He typed back, keep them there. Then he put the phone in his pocket and looked up at the tower above him. 31 floors of glass and steel and the accumulated weight of 11 years. And understood, with the clarity that comes to a person at the precise moment when everything they have built is simultaneously at its most threatened and its most real, that the next 72 hours would determine not just whether he kept his empire, but whether the man who came out on the other side of them was someone his sons could one day be told about without shame. That thought, that particular thought, arriving in that particular moment, was something entirely new, and it was, he realized, already changing the calculations. Didn't recognize either, but the subject of the petition he recognized immediately. Termination of parental rights, filed against Kang Tae-jun. Petitioner, Han So-yeon. Legal basis, abandonment of minor children and chronic absence from the family unit. He read it twice. Standing on the pavement outside the Yoido Tower, with the evening traffic moving around him and the sky going dark overhead, he read it twice and then stood very still with the phone in his hand and understood what he was looking at. So-yeon had filed to terminate his parental rights to children whose existence she had not publicly acknowledged knowing about, which meant she had known, not suspected. Known. Known specifically enough to file a legal petition naming them as the subject. Known long enough before the wedding to retain a law firm, prepare documentation, and submit a formal filing to the family court. 3 weeks before the ballroom. 3 weeks before she had stood at the altar with her cold fingers in his hand and looked at him with an expression he had reassessed as management, as performance, as the composed face of a woman who knew something was coming. She had not been managing the surprise of Amara's arrival. She had been managing the timing of her own. The plan, the full plan, the one he had only been seen in pieces, assembled itself now in the cold evening air with the horrible clarity of something that had always been complete and had simply been hidden from the angle he was standing at. Park's campaign had 3 fronts: public destabilization, legal pressure, narrative pressure. He had understood those, he had addressed those. What he had not seen, what neither he nor Shin nor his mother had seen, was the 4th component, the one that So-yeon had been running independently, in parallel, without Park's knowledge or his, using the existence of the triplets as legal leverage not to destabilize Tae-jun, but to permanently sever his connection to them before that connection could be formally established. Because if the parental rights were terminated before he acknowledged the children, before DNA was formally submitted to a court, before any legal relationship was established, then the boys were legally no one's sons but Amara's. And Amara, facing a welfare investigation, and a financial audit and a journalist preparing an explosive story, would be isolated and pressured and without the one resource that could protect her, him. Which meant So-yeon's play was not simply to destabilize Tae-jun, it was to take the children off the board entirely. He called Amara. She picked up on the first ring. "I'm sending you something," he said. His voice was doing the level thing again, the flat, conserving thing, and he could hear it happening and couldn't stop it because stopping it would mean letting the other thing out, and the other thing was not useful right now. "Open it when it comes through. Don't read it alone. Go find my mother first." Tae-jun. Her voice had shifted, the operational calm he'd been hearing for 2 days sharpening into something more alert. "What is it?" So-yeon filed a petition to terminate my parental rights. 3 weeks ago, before the wedding. The silence on the other end of the line had a texture he hadn't heard from her before. Not the processing silence, not the recalibrating silence. Something harder than those, something that had edges. "Send it," she said. He forwarded the document. He heard her open it, heard the quality of her silence change as she read. A specific tightening, invisible but audible somehow. The way a person's breathing changes when they are reading something that is affecting them, and they are working very hard not to let it affect them. "The filing date," she said. 3 weeks ago. The welfare complaint was filed 6 days later. Yes. So the sequence was, she stopped, started again. She filed to terminate your rights first, then Park filed the welfare complaint. The welfare complaint wasn't just about pressuring me. It was supporting evidence for the termination petition. Evidence of an unstable home environment. Yes. And the journalist. Additional pressure, he said. To make me publicly toxic enough that acknowledging the children would damage me more than distancing from them. She was going to make it so that claiming them cost you everything, Amara said. And she was going to make it so that not claiming them left me defenseless. Yes. Another silence, longer this time. My sons, she said. He had heard her say those two words before, in the car, on the phone, earlier today, when he had told her about the investigator in Tongyang. But this time the words were different. This time they were not the words of a woman registering a threat. They were the words of a woman reaching an absolute limit. The specific, quiet, total limit of a person who has been patient and strategic and disciplined and has now encountered the thing that patience and strategy and discipline cannot metabolize. She was not going to cry. He knew her well enough, in the strange, compressed way you come to know someone across 48 hours of crisis, to know she was not going to cry. But her voice, when she spoke again, had something in it that was more serious than tears. What do we do? She said. We respond to the filing tonight, he said. My legal team is already on call. I'm going to redirect them from the journalist matter to the family court petition. We submit a counterfiling with the DNA documentation, the medical records, and the full archive. We establish paternity formally and on the record before the petition can be heard. The petition has a hearing date? Checking. He was already on another call with Shin, who had the document pulled up and was reading the filing details. He heard Shin say something. 14 days, he told Amara. 14 days. We have 14 days to establish formal legal paternity before the termination hearing. Can it be done in 14 days? It can be done in 4, he said, with the right team and the right documentation, which we have. He paused. Amara, the archive, the complete archive. It was designed for exactly this, she said. I told you, I kept it to protect the boys if danger ever found them. A breath. Short. Controlled. This is what I kept it for. He stood on the pavement and felt the full weight of that. 3.5 years of a woman in a quiet city building, something she hoped she would never need to use, in the specific way that people build things they hope they'll never need, because the alternative to building them is being unprotected when the danger comes. She had known, not the specifics, not Park or Soyeon or the welfare complaint or the petition, but she had known, with the deep structural intelligence of someone who understood exactly what world her children had been born into, that the danger would come from somewhere, and that when it came it would use her sons as instruments. She had been right, and she had been ready. He arrived in Yongin at 7:40. The estate was lit from within, warm light in the main house windows, the kind of light that means people are home and awake, and the rooms are being used. He parked and walked to the front entrance, and the housekeeper opened the door before he knocked. He heard them before he saw them. Voices from the garden, one of them his mother's, precise and unhurried, counting in Korean, and a child's voice, slightly imperious, correcting her. And then laughter, his mother laughing, which was a sound he had heard perhaps 40 times in his life, and which landed differently than it usually did tonight, in this specific context, with everything in the last 72 hours behind him. He walked through the house. The garden doors were open. Amara was standing just inside the threshold, watching. She had the leather folder under her arm. Of course she did. She had probably not put it down since he'd called. And she was watching the garden with an expression that was more unguarded than he'd seen on her, the composed face softened by something she hadn't closed off yet because she hadn't heard him come in. He stopped beside her. She glanced at him, looked back at the garden. In the garden, Makai was sitting in front of Tai-jun's mother on a low stone bench, holding up 3 fingers and saying something emphatic in English that made his grandmother respond with the specific combination of dignity and indulgence of a woman who has encountered a force she respects. Malik and Micah were chasing something across the garden, a moth, possibly, or just the idea of one, careening between the sculpted shrubs with the total physical commitment of small children for whom the present moment is the only moment. She's been out there for an hour, Amar said quietly. She came to find me after I read the filing. She read it herself. She didn't say anything for about 2 minutes. Then she put on her coat and went out to the garden and started teaching Makai to count. That's how she processes things, Tae-jun said. She does something concrete. Amara looked at him sideways. Where does that come from, do you think? He almost smiled. They stood in the doorway and watched the garden, and the evening settled around the estate in layers. First the light going, then the temperature dropping by degrees, then the sounds of the garden shifting from the active sounds of children in motion to something slower, the sounds of children winding down, Malik's running becoming walking, becoming a slow orbit around a low shrub that had caught his attention, Micah sitting abruptly in the grass in the way toddlers sit, as if the legs have simply voted to stop. Mackay stood up from the bench. He walked across the garden with the focused, deliberate gait that Tae-jun was beginning to recognize as specifically his. This child's way of moving through the world, as if each step were a considered decision. He walked to the garden doorway. He stopped in front of Tae-jun. He looked up. "You came back," he said. Not a question, not accusation, simply an observation, delivered with the specific gravity of a 3-year-old who has noticed something and is naming it. "Yes," Tae-jun said. Mackay considered this. Then he reached up and put his hand in Tae-jun's, the way he had set his palm on his knee in the hotel suite. That same deliberate placement, that same quality of a decision made and executed without hesitation, and turned and walked back toward the garden, pulling slightly, and Tae-jun went with him because there was no version of not going with him. Behind him, he heard Amara exhale. One breath. Everything she'd been holding, released into the cool evening air of his mother's garden while her sons moved in the last light, and the housekeeper brought tea to the stone table, and the estate existed around them in the particular permanence of things that have been standing for 3 generations and intend to keep standing. Tae-jun sat down on the bench his mother had vacated. Mackay climbed up beside him. Tae-jun's mother appeared at his other side and sat, and for a moment she was simply there. Not speaking, not instructing, not managing, and that quality of her presence beside him was something he hadn't felt since childhood and hadn't realized he'd missed. Across the garden, Amar came to the stone table. She sat. She put the leather folder down on the table beside the tea and looked at him. And in her eyes, across the darkening garden, over the heads of 3 small boys who did not know yet what had been filed against their right to have a father, over the archive that contained 3.5 years of a woman's refusal to be erased, in her eyes was something that was not forgiveness, was not trust, was not anything as simple or as finished as either of those things. It was something more like the look of a person who has decided, provisionally and with full awareness of the risk, to take one more step onto ground they are not yet certain will hold. It was enough. It was, right now, everything. He held her gaze. And somewhere inside the house a phone rang. His legal team, his lawyers, the machinery of what came next beginning to turn. And neither of them moved, and for 11 seconds the garden was just a garden, and the children were just children, and 2 people who had made catastrophic mistakes with each other's lives sat across a stone table in the fading light and held something fragile and necessary between them like water in open hands. Then he stood. He picked up his phone and walked inside to fight the last battle. The call lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. Tae-jun stood in his mother's study, a room that smelled of old paper and cedar and the particular quality of accumulated decision-making, with his phone pressed to his ear and his legal team on the other end, and they worked through the counterfiling piece by piece in the methodical, exhausting way that legal work actually happens, which is nothing like the clean architecture of strategy sessions and everything like the slow, detail-heavy labor of building something that has to hold weight under examination. The lead attorney was a woman named Baek Ji-soo, 51 years old, who had spent 23 years in family law and who had received Tae-jun's call with the brisk calm of someone accustomed to crisis calls at inconvenient hours from people who needed things done faster than was strictly reasonable. "The termination petition," she said early in the call, "has a fundamental procedural problem, which is, it was filed before paternity was legally established. You cannot petition to terminate rights that have not been formally recognized by the court. The filing is premature at best and frivolous at worst." A pause, which suggests either that So Yeon's attorneys made an error or that the petition was never intended to succeed on its own merits. "It was intended to create a record," Tae-jun said, "and to apply pressure." "Yes," Beck said. "That's what I thought, which means the response is not primarily legal. The legal response is straightforward. We file the paternity establishment petition tonight with the DNA documentation and the archive, we get an expedited hearing given the existing petition, and within 10 days we have a court order. The harder question is the pressure component. Another pause. What does she actually want? Taejun had been thinking about this since he'd opened the document on the pavement in Yeouido. To not be implicated, he said, in the conspiracy with Park. Yes, the emails put her in a collaborative arrangement with a man who has just been removed from the Syndicate Council for coordinated misconduct. If those emails become public, or if they become part of a legal proceeding, she is directly associated with an organized campaign that targeted minor children. So the petition is leverage, Beck said. She files it, creates a legal threat to your parental standing, and then waits to see if you'd rather settle quietly than expose the emails. Yes? And your preference? He looked out the study window at the dark garden. The boys had been brought inside an hour ago. He'd heard them, distant and drowsy, the sounds of children being moved toward bed. The garden was empty now, lit only by the low landscape lights along the paths, the sculpted shrubs casting small, precise shadows. My preference, he said, is to file everything. Tonight. The paternity petition, the full archive, and a formal response to the termination petition that includes the email chain as exhibit evidence. He paused. If she wants to negotiate after that, I'll listen. But I'm not settling before the record is established. Beck was quiet for a moment. That will make her an enemy. She already is one, he said. I'd rather have an enemy I can see clearly than one who is pretending to be something else. All right, Beck said. Then we work through the night. They did. Amara found him in the study at 1 a.m. She knocked, a single knock, quiet. The knock of someone who is not sure they should interrupt but has decided to anyway. He called her in. She came in carrying 2 cups of tea and set one on the desk beside his elbow without comment, and then sat in the chair across from the desk and tucked her feet beneath her, the way she probably sat when she was alone and not managing the presentation of herself, and looked at him. The boys are asleep, she said. All 3? Mackay held out until about 20 minutes ago. He kept asking when you were coming back inside. He looked at the desk, at the documents spread across it, the counterfiling, the paternity petition, the exhibit index for the archive. What did you tell him? That you were working and that you would be here in the morning. I will be. I know. She wrapped her hands around her cup. Tell me where we are, he told her. The filing strategy, the timeline, the termination petition's procedural weakness, Soyeon's likely calculation. He told it plainly, the way he'd been telling her things for 3 days now, without management, without the version of events edited for someone else's comfort. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she sat with it for a moment. She miscalculated, Amar said. Yes. She thought I would be easier to isolate than I was. She thought a woman alone in Tongyang with 3 children and no institutional backing was a soft target. He looked at her. She didn't know about the archive. Nobody knew about the archive, Amara said. That was the point. She looked down at her cup. I started building it 6 weeks after I arrived in Tongyang. I had just found out I was having more than 1 child. The first scan showed 3, and I sat in the car outside the clinic for about 40 minutes. Ahmasi asolpom item. A pause. Not because I was scared of the children. I knew I could raise them. I'd done harder things. I was trying to understand what world they were being born into. What world you had built. What that world might do to them someday if it decided they were useful. He was quiet. I decided that the best protection I could give them wasn't money or lawyers or alliances, she said. It was a record so clean and so complete that anyone who tried to characterize me as unstable or exploitative or unfit would be walking into a wall of documentation before they'd finished the sentence. She looked up. I was right. You were right, he said. I was also, she said carefully, very lonely. For a long time. I want you to know that, not because I want your sympathy, but because I think it's accurate, and I have spent a long time being accurate with you, and I don't want to stop now. She met his eyes. I built something strong, and I was proud of what I built. And I was also, for the first 2 years especially, very alone inside it. The study was quiet. Outside, the estate was settled into the particular silence of very late night. Deep, total, The silence of a house where everyone else is asleep and the world has contracted to the size of a single lit room. "I know," he said. "I know that doesn't help." "No," she agreed, "but I didn't say it to make you feel bad. I said it because you need to understand what you're asking when you talk about being part of their lives going forward." She set the cup down. "It's not just about the boys. A father is not an isolated variable. You being in their lives means you being in my life, in my house, in the city I chose, in the world I built." She looked at him steadily. "That world is not soul. It doesn't run on fear or power or who owes who what. It runs on consistency and small things, and showing up when you said you would. I understand that. Do you?" Not challenging, genuinely asking. He thought about the 48 hours just passed, about the council chamber and Park's face and the photograph on the pavement and the 4-hour legal call, about the way he had spent 3 days operating in the only mode he knew: strategic, controlling, moving pieces, applying pressure at load-bearing points, about how effective it had been and how exhausted he was and how none of it had produced the one thing that actually mattered, which was the look on Makai's face when he had put his hand in Tae-jun's and said, "You came back." "I'm learning," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "That's the first honest thing you've said about yourself," she said. "That doesn't have a performance in it." He didn't respond to that, but he didn't look away either. Done. The paternity petition was filed at 3:47 in the morning. The counter-response to the termination petition was filed 11 minutes later. Baek Ji-soo sent a confirmation message at 4:12. "Everything is in. The email chain is Exhibit 7. Expedited hearing request submitted on the basis of the existing petition and the minor children's medical status." Tae-jun read the confirmation at the study desk, with the cold remains of the tea Amara had brought him, and the first gray edge of dawn beginning at the bottom of the window, and felt the particular exhaustion of a person who has been running at maximum capacity for 72 hours and has just been told they can stop, temporarily, and does not quite know how to do that. He closed the laptop. He sat in the quiet. Then he went upstairs to the guest room his mother had prepared for him, took off his jacket and shoes, and lay down on the bed without changing and was asleep in approximately 3 minutes. He woke to the sound of someone falling. Not a serious fall. The small, dramatic crash of a child losing their footing on something they shouldn't have been climbing, followed by the specific 2-second silence that precedes the decision about whether to cry, followed by the crying. He was on his feet and in the hallway before he was fully awake. The sound was coming from the end of the corridor, a small sitting room that connected the guest wing to the main house. He pushed the door open. Micah was on the floor beside an overturned footstool, holding his knee, crying with the total physical commitment of a 3-year-old who has decided that this is, in fact, the appropriate response to the situation. Malik was standing 2 feet away, looking at his brother with the expression of someone who was present when the incident occurred and is now calculating how much involvement to claim. Makai was in the doorway to the corridor looking at Tae-jun. Tae-jun crossed the room. He crouched down in front of Micah and looked at the knee, red, scraped, not serious, and then looked at the child's face, which was wet and furious and completely unself-conscious in the way that very small people are unself-conscious about their distress. "Let me see," Tae-jun said. Micah, still crying, extended the leg with the precise instinct of a child who wants the wound examined, even while insisting on the right to continue being upset about it. Tae-jun looked at the knee. "It's okay," he said. "It's not bad." "It hurts," Micah said, very clearly, through the crying, stating a fact. "I know," Tae-jun said. "It does hurt, you're right." Something in Micah's face shifted. The specific shift of a child who has had their reality confirmed rather than minimized, which is, apparently, Tae-jun was discovering, the most important thing. The crying didn't stop immediately, but it changed. Dropped a register, became something more manageable. "What were you climbing?" Tae-jun said. Micah pointed at the footstool. "Why?" Micah looked at Malik. Malik looked at the ceiling. "There was something up there, Malik said, to no one in particular." "What was up there?" "A thing," Malik said. Tae-jun looked at the shelf above the footstool. A small decorative object, a ceramic figure of some kind, sat at the shelf's edge, slightly displaced from its original position. Did you get it down? Taejun said. No, Malik said. Did Micah fall before or after? A pause. Before, Malik said, with the reluctant honesty of a child who has realized that the lie would be worse than the truth. Taejun sat back on his heels. He looked at Micah, whose crying had wound down to a series of diminishing hitches. He looked at Malik, who was now studying the footstool with intense focus. He looked at Makai, who was still in the doorway, watching the scene with that particular gravity of his. Come here, Taejun said. Makai crossed the room and sat down on the floor beside Taejun without being asked twice, which felt like trust in which Taejun registered as such. Careful not to make too much of it, careful not to make too little. The four of them sat on the floor of the small sitting room in the early morning. Micah with his scraped knee, Malik with his strategic relationship with the truth, Makai with his ancient toddler's seriousness, and Kang Taejun, who had spent the night filing legal documents and the year before that building an empire, and the decade before that learning to be the most feared man in Seoul, and nobody said anything for a moment, and it was not uncomfortable, which surprised him. Does it still hurt? He asked Micah. A little, Micah said. That's normal, Taejun said. It'll stop. Micah nodded, accepting this as information rather than comfort, which was, Taejun thought, a very particular kind of child. Amara appeared in the doorway. She took in the scene, the overturned footstool, the four of them on the floor, Micah's red knee, with the rapid assessment of a woman who has been reading her children's situations at a glance for 3 years and has become very good at it. She looked at Taejun. He gave a small, slight shrug that meant, He's fine. I have it. You don't have to come in. She looked at him for a moment. Then she leaned against the doorframe and crossed her arms and stayed where she was, watching, and said nothing, and that, her staying in the doorway instead of coming in to manage it, was the most significant thing she had done in 3 days. The expedited hearing was granted 6 days later. The family court judge was a woman in her late 50s named Hong, who had the permanently unsurprised expression of someone who has seen every configuration of human family dysfunction across a 30-year career and has developed, as a result, a preference for documentation over testimony and a deep suspicion of dramatic narrative. She got documentation. Baek Ji-soo presented the paternity case first. DNA report, birth records, the medical file that had been the original purpose of the entire sequence of events. Amara's archive cross-referenced and indexed. Judge Hong read. She asked 3 questions, all of them precise, all of them about procedural details rather than emotional content. She received 3 precise answers. Then she looked at the termination petition. She looked at the filing date. She looked at the date of the DNA submission. This petition was filed, she said, in the flat tone of a judge stating a fact rather than asking a question, before paternity was legally established. Correct, said the attorney representing So Yeon, a man who had the look of someone who had been told this morning that the case had developed significantly beyond what his client had originally briefed him and who was managing that information with professional composure. On what legal basis, Judge Hong said. A pause. The petitioner had reason to believe. On what legal basis, Judge Hong said again. Same tone, same volume. Another pause. The petition will be withdrawn, So-yeon's attorney said. Judge Hong looked at him for a moment with the expression of a woman who has been on the bench long enough to recognize a controlled retreat when she sees one and who does not find it particularly impressive. The paternity petition, she said, turning back to Baek, is straightforward. The documentation is comprehensive. I'll issue the order within 48 hours. Thank you, Your Honor. The welfare investigation. Judge Hong picked up a different file. Filed 43 days ago. Anonymous source. She read for a moment. The investigating officer's report, which I have here, notes that upon site visit the home was unoccupied and that neighborhood interviews produced no evidence of neglect or instability. The investigation was flagged for administrative review after the source of the filing was identified as a shell entity with documented connections to an individual currently under formal counsel review. She set the file down. The investigation is closed. She said it without inflection, without drama, just closed. Amara, sitting beside Taejun at the respondent's table, did not make a sound. but her right hand, which had been resting on the table surface, turned over slightly. An involuntary movement, the hand opening upward, a gesture of release so small it was almost nothing. He saw it. He did not reach for it, but he saw it. The journalist in Busan published his story 11 days after the council session. It was not the story Park Do-shik had briefed him on. The story that ran, in a long-form digital outlet that covered Korean business and politics, with the specific, interested irreverence of media that doesn't depend on access to the people it covers, was titled "The Architect of His Own Undoing: How Park Do-shik Built a Conspiracy Using Children as Currency and Lost Everything." It ran 4,000 words. It used the full documentation package, the Dason Partners emails, the welfare complaint origins, the audit request, the timeline of the surveillance against Amara. It was thorough, sourced, and written with the restrained anger of a journalist who had been fed a false story and who had, upon discovering this, redirected his energy toward the true one with considerable enthusiasm. Park Do-shik did not comment. His criminal dealings, the financial irregularities that Shin's audit had surfaced during the documentation process, unrelated to the council conspiracy but illuminated by the same financial tracing, were referred to the appropriate authorities through channels that Tae-jun did not personally direct but did not obstruct. He had told the council he was not asking for punishment. He had not said anything about the authorities. So Yeon read the story. He knew this because she called him the morning it published. He was in Tongyong. He had driven down the previous evening, his first visit to the city he had heard about for 3 days and had never seen, and he had sat in the passenger seat of Amara's small car while she drove from the ferry terminal and pointed out things without sentimentality. The fish market, the school, the harbor, the clinic where Dr. Yoon had first flagged the cardiac irregularity. He had looked at all of it. He had tried to understand what 3.5 years of ordinary life looked like from the inside. So-yeon called at 8:40 in the morning. He stepped outside the house, Amara's house, modest and near the water, exactly what she had described, the sound of the sea permanently present at the edge of everything, and answered. "I see you chose the other option," So-yeon said. Her voice was controlled, not warm, not angry. The voice of a woman who has made a series of calculations and is now accepting the outcome of those calculations with the self-possession of someone who has always known that outcomes were never guaranteed. "You filed the petition," he said, "without telling me, without acknowledging that you knew about the children." "I was protecting Tuko." "Don't," he said. A silence. "All right," she said. "You were protecting your position," he said. "Your inheritance, your place in the succession structure. I understand that. I'm not asking you to pretend it was something else." Tae-jun. "I'm also not interested in relitigating it," he said. "The petition is withdrawn. The paternity order is coming through. The story is published. The record exists." He paused. "What I want to say to you, and I want to say it once and clearly, is that using my children, who you had never met, who you knew about only through surveillance, as instruments in a legal strategy was the specific thing I will not forgive." "You can say that," So-yeon said, "and I understand it. Is there anything else?" A long pause. "No," she said. "There isn't." She hung up. He stood outside Amar's house with the phone in his hand and the sound of the sea around him, and the early morning light of Tongyong falling on the water in a way that was different from Seoul light. Softer, more diffuse, the light of a place that doesn't have anything to prove. He put the phone in his pocket. He went inside. The cardiac panel results came back on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the council session. Dr. Yoon was a small, precise woman who delivered information the way a good physician does, completely, in order, without softening the difficult parts or dramatizing them. She sat across a desk from Tae-jun and Amara and laid out the findings methodically. The mitral valve irregularity was confirmed in all 3 boys. Micah's was the most pronounced, as the preliminary examination had suggested. Malik and Mackay presented with a milder structural variation that, in Dr. Yoon's assessment, required monitoring but not immediate intervention. Annual echocardiograms, some restrictions on high-impact physical activity, a cardiac specialist review every 18 months. Micah was different. "He's not in immediate danger," Dr. Yoon said, and she said it first before the rest of it, which told Tae-jun she was a careful reader of rooms and understood what the people across from her most needed to hear. But the degree of the irregularity puts him in a category where we recommend intervention rather than watchful waiting. Specifically, a minimally invasive repair procedure. It's well established, high success rate. The recovery is manageable for a child his age. Mom, yeah, she paused. The sooner the better, ideally in the next 6 months. Amara asked 4 questions. Precise, medical, specific. The questions of a woman who has been researching cardiac conditions in children for 3 weeks and who is now cross-referencing what she knows against what she's being told. Dr. Yoon answered each one fully. Tae-jun asked 1 question. Who's the best pediatric cardiac surgeon in Korea for this procedure? Dr. Yoon told him. Is she available? I can check. Please check today. Amara looked at him. Not the look from across the garden table, the provisional look, the 1 foot on uncertain ground look. Something different. The look of a woman recalibrating again, updating a file in real time. A man who asked about the best surgeon before the door had closed. A man who said, please check today, as if nothing else on his schedule mattered more than this, because nothing on his schedule did. All right, Dr. Yoon said. She stepped out to make the call. Tae-jun and Amara sat in the examination room in the particular silence of 2 people who have just received news and are each separately processing what it means and have not yet decided what to say to each other about it. He's going to be okay, Amara said. Quietly. Not to him specifically, more like testing the sentence in the room, hearing how it sounded, whether it held. Yes, Tae-jun said. She nodded. Then she put both hands over her face. Not crying. She still wasn't crying, or if she was, it was entirely contained behind the hands, invisible, private. Just covering her face for a moment, the way people do when they need to be somewhere that no one can see them for approximately 15 seconds. He did not say anything. He did not reach for her. He sat beside her and let the 15 seconds be 15 seconds. And when she brought her hands down, her eyes were clear and her face was composed. And she looked at the wall ahead of them with the expression of a woman who has just put something back into order inside herself and is ready to proceed. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Dr. Yoon came back in. The surgeon was available. Yep. The surgery was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In those 6 weeks, Tae-jun drove to Tongyong 8 times. Not all of them were planned. The first 2 were formal visits, structured around the boys' routines, respectful of Amara's schedule and the conditions she had outlined and had not yet fully articulated, but that were present in the way she managed his time with the children. He arrived when he said he would. He left when he said he would. He did not bring gifts. He did not bring his security detail. He came alone in a car that was not a statement, and he knocked on the door of a modest house near the water and waited. The 3rd visit he called from the road. I'm an hour out, he said. I know it's not scheduled. I can turn around. A pause. Makai keeps asking if you're coming, she said. I'm running out of different ways to say maybe. I'll be there in an hour, he said. There's soup, she said. Don't eat before you get here. The 4th visit he learned to make soup. Amara's soup, a modified version of a Nigerian pepper soup that she had adapted over 3 years to use ingredients available in Tongyong's market. A dish that the boys ate with the uncomplicated enthusiasm of children for whom this is simply what soup is, what soup has always been. Required a specific sequence and a specific patience that she communicated with the brisk, no-nonsense pedagogy of a woman who is teaching something practical rather than performing a gesture. You're stirring too fast, she said. How do you know there's a wrong speed for stirring? Everything has a wrong speed, she said. She moved his hand, slowed it. Like that. He stirred like that. Better, she said. He did not read significance into the hand on his hand. He let it be what it was, a cooking correction, and moved the spoon at the right speed and watched the pot and said nothing. And the kitchen was warm and the boys were in the next room with the volume of 3 people who are each separately certain they should be loudest. And the sea was outside, and he was, he realized, not performing anything. He was just there. It was the strangest feeling he'd had in 11 years. Micah's surgery was on a Wednesday morning in autumn. The hospital was in Seoul, the best facility, the best surgeon, arranged without discussion because Taejun had simply arranged it, and Amara had simply accepted it, which was itself a small, significant thing. They drove up together the day before. The boys in the back seat, Malik narrating everything visible from the window with the comprehensive enthusiasm of a child who treats observation as performance. Makai reading a picture book with focused intensity. Micah asleep across both his brother's laps with the total confidence of a child who trusts the world to hold him. Taejun drove. Amara sat in the passenger seat and did not sleep, though it was a 3-hour drive. She watched the road and occasionally looked in the mirror at the boys and said nothing for long stretches, and he let the silence be silence and did not fill it. At some point she said, "He's not scared." "I know." "I am," she said, simply, without apology. "I know that too," he said. She looked out the window. "I spent 3 years being the only person who was scared for them," she said. "The only person who woke up at 2 in the morning to check if they were breathing. The only one who sat in waiting rooms and read medical summaries and tried to understand what every word meant." She paused. "I got very good at being scared alone. I turned it into something functional." She glanced at him. "It's strange to have someone else in the room." "Strange bad or strange different," he said. She thought about it. "Strange different," she said. He nodded. That was enough. The surgery took 4 hours and 11 minutes. Taejun sat in the surgical waiting room with Amara on one side and his mother on the other. His mother had arrived without being asked at 7 in the morning in a car driven by her housekeeper, wearing her coat and carrying a thermos of tea and sitting down beside Amara with the wordless authority of a woman claiming a position. Amara had looked at her. His mother had poured tea into a cup and handed it over. Amara had taken it. Malik and Makai were with the housekeeper in a different part of the hospital, a family waiting area with toys and a television, because Amara had decided that a surgical waiting room was not the right environment for 3-year-olds, and Taejun had agreed and his mother had said nothing and simply gone and arranged it, which was his mother's way of agreeing. 4 hours and 11 minutes. Taejun had been in rooms under more obvious forms of tension than this one. He had been in rooms where the outcome depended on his own performance, his own decisions, his own capacity to read the situation and apply the right pressure at the right moment. He knew how to manage those rooms. His body had developed, over 11 years, a kind of operational readiness for that kind of tension, a tightening, a focusing, the physical state of a person who is about to act. This was entirely different. There was nothing to do. The outcome depended on someone else's hands, on a surgeon he had met once for 30 minutes, in a room he could not enter, working on a child who had been alive for 3 years and 4 months, and who had put his hand in Taejun's and said, "You came back," and who had, in the 6 weeks since, slowly and without ceremony, begun calling him Dad. Not consistently, not always, but sometimes, in the loose, unconscious way that children adopt language before they've decided what it means. He sat in the waiting room and was afraid. He did not perform composure. He did not manage it. He simply sat in the plastic chair with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely linked and his eyes on the floor, and was afraid in the ordinary, raw, unglamorous way of a parent in a surgical waiting room, and it was the most honest thing he had ever done in a public space. At some point, Amara reached over and put her hand over his, not interlacing, not grasping, just setting her hand over his the way he'd set his palm on the desk in the study that night. Deliberately, the gesture of a decision. He turned his hand over. She let him. They sat like that for the remaining 40 minutes. When the surgeon came out, her expression was neutral, the way surgeons' expressions are trained to be neutral while they walk toward waiting families. And then she reached them and the neutrality shifted into something that Taejun only later identified as satisfaction, the specific satisfaction of someone whose work went exactly as it should. "He's out," she said. "Everything went well. Textbook repair. He's in recovery. You can see him in about an hour." Amara exhaled. It was the breath she had been holding since the morning they'd sat in Dr. Yoon's office. Maybe longer. 3.5 years, possibly. A breath compressed down to its smallest possible form, and now released finally into a surgical waiting room in Seoul on a Wednesday morning in autumn, while the city went about its business outside the windows, and 2 people who had broken something between them sat holding hands. His mother stood. She picked up the thermos. She walked to the corridor and stopped and turned. She looked at them, at Taejun, and then at Amara, and then back at Taejun, with the expression he had seen her deploy exactly twice in his life, both times at moments when she had witnessed something she considered sufficient. "I'll go check on the other two," she said. She left. Well, Micah in the recovery room was small and pale and connected to things and completely certain that the first order of business upon regaining consciousness was to request juice, which he did, in a voice still rough from the anesthesia, but carrying the fundamental Micah quality of a factual statement rather than a request. "Juice," he said, to the room in general. "Yes?" Amara said. She was holding his hand. "In a few minutes." "Now," Micah said. "A few minutes," she said. He considered this. "Okay," he said, and went back to sleep. Taejun stood at the foot of the bed. He looked at this child, this person who had his eyes and Amara's obstinacy and a repaired heart that was now beating with the reliability it should always have had, and felt something settle in him that had been unsettled for longer than 3 days, longer than 3 years, possibly for the full 11 years that he had spent building a world out of the wrong materials and calling it enough. He was not a good man. He understood that with more clarity now than he ever had, not in a self-punishing way. He had done too many useful things and helped too many people in various imperfect fashions to fully own the villain's narrative. But he had been a man who prioritized the wrong things in the wrong order for a long time, and the cost of that had been paid by a woman who deserved better and 3 boys who had deserved a father from the beginning. He could not go back. He was very clear about that. He could not undo the 3 years or the divorce or the way the channels had been slow-walked or the pregnancy he hadn't known about because he hadn't thought carefully enough about the human being he was discarding. He could not go back and make different choices in that gray November light with Amara's pen scratching across the paper. What he could do was what was in front of him. He stayed until Micah woke up properly, woke up fully, looked around the room, took inventory, and then looked at Taejun at the foot of the bed with the Micah quality of a child who states what he observes. "You're here," Micah said. "Yes," Taejun said. Micah looked at his mother. "He's here," Micah said. "I see that," Amara said. Micah looked back at Taejun. "Did you wait?" he said. "Yes," Taejun said. "The whole time." Micah absorbed this. "Okay," he said, and held out his hand. Taejun came to the side of the bed. He took the small hand, carefully around the IV line and held it and stood there, and it required no performance whatsoever. The woodworking studio came later, not immediately, not as a gesture. It came because Taejun mentioned on one of the Tongyong visits that he had made things with his hands when he was young. Before Seoul, before the syndicate, when he was 17 and his grandfather had a workshop in Yongin, full of tools that smelled of cedar and old oil and possibility. Malik had said, with the comprehensive interest he brought to all new information, "What kind of things?" "Boxes," Taejun said. "Small shelves. Once a very bad chair." "How bad?" Malik said. "Bad enough that no one sat in it." Malik had thought about this. "I want to make something," he said. So they had. A workbench first. Borrowed tools. The small workshop space behind Amara's house that had previously housed garden equipment and was now housing something different. Then a small boat for Malik, who had decided that a boat was the appropriate first project for someone living near water. It took 3 weekends. It was not a perfect boat. The proportions were slightly off and the finish was uneven in 2 places, and Malik had at one point driven a nail through the wrong piece of wood entirely, which required starting that section again. Malik had been furious. Taejun had handed him a different piece of wood and said, "Start again." "It's ruined," Malik said. "The wood is ruined. The boat isn't. Start again." Malik had looked at him. "How do you know?" Malik said. "Because you know what it's supposed to be," Taejun said. "That doesn't go away when a piece of wood goes wrong." Malik had started again. The boat was finished on a Sunday afternoon, and it was set into the water at the small harbor down from Amara's house, and it floated, which was the only criterion that mattered. Malik stood at the edge of the water watching it with an expression that Tae-jun recognized without being able to name. The expression of someone who has made something and is seeing it exist in the world independent of their hands. Amara was standing beside him on the dock. She looked at her son's face. Then she looked at Tae-jun. "Nice boat," she said. "Terrible proportions," he said. "Still floating," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." The formal studio came 6 months after that. He bought the land beside Amara's house, a narrow lot previously vacant, that required a conversation with a Tongyang property agent who appeared to recognize him and did not comment on it either because they were professionally discreet or because property transactions in Tongyang were simply considered private matters, which Tae-jun appreciated. He did not ask Amara's permission. He told her, "I'm building a studio," he said, "on the lot next door, for woodworking. I want the boys to have somewhere to work with me on weekends." She looked at him for a moment. "How big?" she said. "Small," he said. "Single room, workshop space. It won't affect the sightline from your house." She thought about this. "2 windows," she said, "on the seaside." "Done," he said. She went back to the translation contract she'd been working on. He went back to Seoul to manage the things that still needed managing. And in the 6 months after that, while the studio was being built and Micah's recovery was measured in weeks and then confirmed complete, and while the syndicate moved through the particular restructuring that follows the removal of a senior figure and the resolution of a conspiracy and settles eventually into the new shape of things, through all of that, Tae-jun was in Tongyang every weekend without exception. Not always for long. Sometimes for 2 days, sometimes for 1, twice for only an afternoon, because the Seoul situation required his presence on Sunday morning. But he came. He called when he said he would call. He arrived when he said he would arrive. He did not miss birthdays. The boys turned 4 in the spring in Amara's backyard with a cake that Tae-jun had not made but had contributed to in the sense of standing in the kitchen the night before with flour on his jacket, and Makai directing him with the seriousness of a child who has strong opinions about the ratio of chocolate to everything else. He did not miss the school performances. Malik's class performed something involving weather patterns that required the children to dress as types of precipitation. Malik was a thunderstorm. He took this role very seriously. Tae-jun sat in the 3rd row of a primary school auditorium in Tongyang and watched his son be a thunderstorm with the same focused attention he had brought to council sessions, and it was not a lesser experience. It was, if he was honest, if he was accurate, the way Amara was accurate, considerably more important. He was still, when he was in Seoul, the same man. The syndicate still needed what it needed. There were still rooms where the particular quality of his presence was the thing that determined outcomes. Still men who made calculations based on his reputation and his history and the specific way he occupied space. That did not change. He did not pretend it would. But he stopped measuring his success by it. He measured it differently now. The evening that Amara finally said what needed to be said was not a dramatic evening. It was a Tuesday. Ordinary. He had driven down after a late meeting in Seoul that had run until 7, which put him in Tongyang at 10, which was later than he'd planned. The boys were asleep. She had left the door unlocked. He let himself in. She was at the kitchen table with a translation contract and a cup of tea and the reading glasses she had recently acquired and was self-conscious about, which he had learned not to comment on. She looked up. "There's rice," she said. He served himself rice and sat down across from her and ate while she worked, and they were quiet together in the kitchen the way people are quiet together when the silence is not awkward and does not need to be filled. After a while, she set down the contract. She looked at him. "I don't trust you completely," she said. He set down the spoon. "I want to be honest about that," she said. "You've been consistent for 8 months. You've shown up. You've been good with them. Genuinely, not as performance." She held his eyes. "And I don't completely trust you yet. I want you to know that not as a punishment, but as a fact, because I think you deserve to know exactly where we are." He was quiet for a moment. "What would complete trust look like?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said. "I've been trying to figure that out. I think it's not a threshold moment. I think it's just more of what you've been doing. More time. More consistency." She paused. "The problem is that I've been alone for so long that I've gotten very good at it. I don't need you to be here. I've been very careful to make sure I don't need you to be here because I thought needing you was a vulnerability. Is it? He said. She looked at him. Maybe not, she said. Maybe that's the thing I'm still working out. He nodded. I'm not going anywhere, he said. I know, she said, and then quietly, that's new. He did not say anything else. She picked up the contract again. He finished his rice. The house settled around them in the particular way that houses settle late at night. The small sounds, the cooling air, the sense of rooms being occupied and used and lived in. Outside, the sea was doing what the sea does, which is exist continuously and without regard for anything happening on the land beside it, which was, he had come to understand, one of the reasons she had chosen this city. The sea didn't care about soul. Didn't care about councils or conspiracies or reputations or empires. It just moved, constant and enormous, and after a while you started to find that restful rather than indifferent. He had started to find it restful. That surprised him, still, every time. He built the studio's second window himself. Not the framing, the contractor had done the framing, but the finishing, the trim, the installation of the deep sill that Mackay had specifically requested because he wanted somewhere to put things while he worked. Taejun spent a Saturday morning measuring and cutting and fitting, and Mackay sat on an upturned crate beside him handing him things when asked, which mostly consisted of handing him the wrong thing and then correcting this when informed. That's the sanding block, Taejun said. You said the flat thing, Mackay said. The flat wooden thing. That's flat, Mackay said, gesturing at the sanding block with complete logic. You're right, Taejun said. I'll be more specific. Mackay handed him the correct thing. Better, Mackay said. Taejun fitted the sill trim. He held it in place and looked at the angle and adjusted by 2 millimeters and looked again. And it was right. And he reached for the small finish nails, and Mackay handed them without being asked, having apparently determined on his own what was needed next. He looked at the boy beside him. Mackay was watching the trim with focused interest, his face carrying its usual quality of serious engagement with the world, the quality that had struck Taejun first in the hotel suite 18 months ago, this child who sat directly on the floor in front of him as if deciding that was where he was going to be. Mackay, he said. The boy looked up. When you grow up, Taejun said, what do you want to do? Mackay thought about this with the thoroughness he brought to questions. I want to build things, he said, and fix things. A pause. And know things. That's 3 things, Taejun said. Yes, Mackay said, without apology. Taejun drove the first finish nail. Those are good things, he said. Mackay went back to watching. The window went in straight and clean, and the afternoon light came through both of them. Both windows, sea-facing, the light off the water different from soul light, gentler and more honest, and fell across the new workbench and the tools hung on their hooks and the small boat in the corner that still floated and always would. Outside, he could hear Malik and Micah in the yard. Amar's voice, once, saying something brief and firm in the way she said things. Then laughter. Then the sound of feet on gravel. He sat on the upturned crate and looked at the room. The small room that he had built beside the house of the woman he had failed and the 3 boys he had not known existed, in a city that smelled of salt and fish and cedar shavings. 3 hours from the Empire he still ran and would continue to run because the Empire was real, and it mattered, and he was still the person it needed him to be. But he was also this, also a man on an upturned crate in a woodworking studio with a 4-year-old beside him, with fresh sawdust on his hands and finish nails in his pocket, and a window he had put in himself letting in the right light. Also, this. That was the thing he had not understood for most of his life. That a person could be more than one thing, that the Empire and the studio were not contradictions to be resolved, but simply the actual shape of a life that had finally grown large enough to hold everything it should have held from the beginning. He had not earned it easily. He was not done earning it. But he was here. And here, it turned out, was where everything that mattered was. Mackay slid off the crate and walked to the window and put both hands on the sill and looked out at the water. Good window, he said. Thank you, Taejun said. I helped, Mackay said. You handed me the wrong thing 4 times, Taejun said. And then the right thing, Mackay said. That's how you learn. Taejun looked at his son. His son looked at the sea, and the light came through both windows, clean and honest and even, the way light comes through windows that have been put in straight, and fell across the room they had built together and stayed.